Chapter 1242. What a dreamy scene. He was actually teaching a group of giant dragons how to cook hot pot. Harrison felt that he had reached the peak of his life. After Harrison's complicated explanation, the giant dragons still did not fully understand. "You're saying that we have to cook ourselves?" a frost dragon asked Harrison. The other giant dragons also looked at Harrison. As the powerhouses of the tribe, it was naturally not their turn to cook. That was something that only those useless people who could not cultivate had to do. Correction, it's hot pot, not cooking. Harrison picked up the hot pot guide in his hand. Look, it's already recorded in detail how to operate it. Every ingredient has its own unique method of boiling and standard time. As long as you follow the instructions, even a 4-year-old child can make delicious food for himself. All the giant dragons frowned as they looked at the hot pot guide in their hands, but no one reached out to take it. The atmosphere became silent and awkward again. Harrison tactfully shut his mouth. Although he didn't think that he could make any delicious food at first, he believed that he wouldn't lose to the two children after seeing how much Little Boss and Little Anna ate by themselves and enjoyed their food. Right at this moment, Elizabeth walked over and asked in a cold voice, "May I know what kind of soup base and vegetables you would like to order?" All the giant dragons looked at Elizabeth at the same time. As the daughter of Rankster, no one could underestimate her even though she had become a waitress in a restaurant. She did not avoid the gaze of everyone at all. She just looked at them calmly. "Chemph. If my dead brother knew that his precious daughter actually went to a human restaurant to be a waitress, I'm afraid he wouldn't be able to rest in peace even after he died." Fox looked at Elizabeth with a mocking smile. "Then you'd better pray that he's already dead. Otherwise, not being smashed to death by a pig will be your greatest regret," Elizabeth said in a cold voice as she looked at Fox coldly. Fox's expression changed slightly. He suddenly shuddered when he thought of those giant dragons that were tortured to death by Rankster. Given his character, if he's not dead, how could there be no news of him for so long? "Don't expect him to come back and support you," Fox said as calmly as he could. "He has never backed me up, and I don't need anyone to back me up." Elizabeth pursed her lips. "Even if he's dead, sooner or later, I'll use the same method as him to make you pay for what you've done." "You!" Fox was furious. Elizabeth actually dared to threaten him. "Miss Elizabeth, we're here to take you home." The elder sitting beside Fox looked at Elizabeth and lowered his voice. "With your status, it's not suitable for you to be a waiter. You'll bring shame to the reputation of the Frost Dragon tribe. Should I have died on the Frost battlefield to be worthy of your so-called honor and reputation?" Elizabeth sneered as she looked at the old man and the other two clansmen. This made her think of that day on the Frost battlefield, those elders of the clan who stood on the high platform and sneered. Their smiles were so vicious and disgusting. The old man furrowed his brows and his voice deepened. "The first elder asked us to bring you back. The elder council has decided to let bygones be bygones. Do you think I should thank you for your magnanimity?" Elizabeth interrupted the old man. The old man choked. He looked at the mocking smile on Elizabeth's face. It was as if he saw the shadow of Rankster who killed his way into the Frost Dragon Island alone and was unstoppable. The Frost Dragons frowned as well. They had already given in. What else did Elizabeth want? A bunch of old men bullying a young lady, and now you dare to say that you'll let bygones be bygones? "I've underestimated the thickness of the Frost Dragon tribe's skin." Jack pursed his lips before smiling at Elizabeth. "Miss Elizabeth, I'm JYNX from the Golden Dragon tribe. I'm here on the orders of the chief and the Elder Council to invite you to Golden Island. You'll be appointed as one of the successors of the Golden Dragon tribe and compete fairly with the younger generation of the Golden Dragon tribe." The commotion here attracted the attention of many guests. Upon hearing that, everyone looked at Elizabeth differently. The successor of the Golden Dragon tribe's chief, which meant that she might become the chief of the Golden Dragon tribe in the future. Oh my God! The one serving them now might be the future chief of the Golden Dragon tribe. In the restaurant, Yarbemia, who was ordering food for the guests, looked at Elizabeth worriedly. Did these baddies want to hurt Elizabeth again? In the kitchen, Meg was also thinking about the purpose of Fox, JYNX, and the other dragon's visit. He had read the information about the dragons, and had some understanding of the relationship between the two tribes. Because of Rankster, the two tribes were once like fire and water. Later on, they were defeated by Rankster. The relationship between Rankster and Alex was also a little complicated. The two of them had fought many times, and Alex had the upper hand. 3 years ago, after Alex was ambushed and disappeared in the rain, Rankster also disappeared. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Elizabeth was Rankster's only daughter, and also the most powerful member of the younger generation of the Frost Dragon tribe. Fox was Rankster's younger brother. Back then, he had the chance to inherit the position of chief. Now, he was a strong contender for the position of chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. However, Fox was not a kind uncle. Back then, on the Frost battlefield, he had intended to kill Elizabeth on the spot. However, he was injured by a pig thrown at him, and saved Elizabeth. Chapter 1243. Fox felt uneasy for some reason, just like the illegitimate son he looked down on back then. Every time that illegitimate son appeared, everyone would be terrified. Now, Elizabeth made him feel that way again. The strong uneasiness made him want to kill her to prevent any future trouble. However, this was Chaos City, and Jinx was watching from the side. It was not a good opportunity to make a move. The Frost Dragons also looked a little uncomfortable. Rankster had stirred up trouble in the Frost Dragon tribe back then, and almost reshuffled the entire Frost Dragon tribe. Could it be that Elizabeth wanted to go down Rankster's path again? Many customers were shocked. Elizabeth actually rejected the invitation of 2 major dragon tribes. Wasn't she too stubborn? Please order, Elizabeth said calmly. You're not going back to Dragon Island, and you're willing to be a service staff member here. I want to see how far you can go. Fox took a deep look at Elizabeth and sneered in his heart. After that, he flipped open the menu casually. Fox's anus tightened when he saw the insanely spicy red soup. He recalled the fear of being dominated by the insanely spicy grilled fish during the previous peace negotiation. Little fatty, how should we order this soup base? Jinx asked Harrison. All the giant dragons also looked at Harrison. It was their first time eating hot pot, and they had no experience, but they couldn't show that they didn't know. If you're a man, eat the insanely spicy, Harrison said with a pat on his chest. That sounds interesting. Jinx nodded, and then said to Elizabeth, give me 4 insanely spicy red soup bases. Then, he looked at Fox and the rest provocatively, and mocked, why? You don't even dare to eat the insanely spicy? Insanely spicy it is. Who's afraid? A Frost Dragon said without hesitation. The other 2 followed. Fox's throat moved, and he was struggling. Scared? Jinx sneered. 1 insanely spicy, Fox said in a low voice. He consciously used frost to protect his anus this time, so he shouldn't be so miserable. I'll have a spicy one, with less pepper, Harrison said quickly. All the giant dragons turned to look at him at the same time. Didn't this guy just say that men should be insanely spicy? I'm just a little fatty, Harrison said meekly. He was just saying that for a moment. He didn't expect these giant dragons to really order the insanely spicy. That was too scary. The giant dragons thought for a while, and accepted Harrison's explanation very naturally. That made sense. If a little fatty ate the same things as them, wouldn't it make them look the same as the little fatty? Please tick the soup pot, the dish you want, and the number of servings on the menu, Elizabeth reminded him. Spicy soup pot, 1 for each dish. Harrison picked up the pencil on the menu, selected the spicy soup pot, and wrote a line of words. Then I'll have an insanely spicy soup pot with 10 servings of each dish. Jinx wrote on the menu. +1 +1 +1. The 3 golden colossal dragons quickly agreed. The Frost Dragons looked at each other, and agreed. Please wait for a moment. For the dipping sauce, please go to the condiments area to mix it. Elizabeth kept the menu and the 9-grid hot pot on the table, and turned to walk towards the kitchen. While the customers outside were still waiting, some of the customers in the restaurant had already had their hot pot served. The design of this soup pot is really discriminating against light eaters. Vanessa looked at the soup pot in front of her. The small pot was filled with thick white soup, and the spicy soup pot was surrounded by red chili and chili oil. The size ratio was about 1:5. It was like a pitiful little lamb surrounded by a pack of wolves. "The design of this pot in a pot is really artistic and practical," Randy exclaimed. He picked up a piece of beef with his chopsticks and put it into the pot. He smiled and said, "I'm going to start eating." "Miss, what do you want to eat?" "I'll cook it for you," Laura quickly said when she saw that Vanessa was about to start. With the princess's noble status, how could she cook for herself? That was not in line with etiquette. "No way. You cook for yourself. I want to cook for myself." Vanessa had already picked up a long piece of duck intestine, and said seriously, "Mr. Max said that the soul of the hot pot is to cook it yourself. The duck intestine cooked by others has no soul." After saying that, Vanessa stared at the clock on the wall as she picked up the duck intestine and dipped it in the boiling soup pot. After a few dips, the duck intestine indeed became curled, and she rolled it in her own dipping sauce. As she couldn't eat things that were too spicy, her dipping sauce followed one of the recommended light recipes. She only added oyster sauce, soy sauce, minced garlic, coriander, and sesame oil, and poured half a spoonful of hot soup over it. After rolling the duck intestine in the dipping sauce, the temperature immediately dropped significantly. She then put it into her mouth and chewed gently. The duck intestine looked soft, but it was crispy when she bit into it. The crunchy and chewy texture made her teeth squeal in joy, and brought her teeth an incomparable pleasure. The dipping sauce gave the duck intestine an interesting soul as it alternated between hot and cold. The dipping sauce gave the duck intestine its flavor, and it was a delicious feast for her teeth and taste buds. After swallowing the duck intestine, Vanessa felt that her teeth were still savoring that wonderful moment. "This duck intestine is too delicious. Furthermore, I cooked it myself," Vanessa exclaimed with her eyes wide open. What was even more amazing was that she cooked the duck intestine herself. For a princess who had never been in a kitchen, or even seen a chef cook with her own eyes, this feeling of accomplishment was even more intense than receiving a gem from the king. Laura, who was still thinking that the princess should cook for herself, smiled when she saw Vanessa's expression. It seemed that the princess really liked to eat this way. In that case, she would also try this new way of eating. "This fat beef is simply the best." Randy chewed on the fat beef with an intoxicated expression. The tender beef was sliced very thinly, and it could be eaten immediately after being dipped into the boiling soup. The tender texture and rich meaty aroma were intoxicating. After being dipped into the spicy red soup, the spicy taste of the fat beef made one's scalp tingle. It instantly chased away the chill from standing outside for more than an hour, and it was a refreshing feeling. Randy picked up another piece of fat beef and placed it into the boiling soup. He lamented, "The most beautiful thing in the world is probably eating meat. It will never lie to you, and it will never betray you. Eat a pound, grow a pound, and it will always be honest with you." "I agree with what you said." Abraham picked up a piece of tripe and placed it into the pot. He glanced at his own stomach. Chapter 1244. Your soup pots and dishes have all been served. Please enjoy. Elizabeth pushed the last trolley to Harrison's side, and then placed the 9-square grid full of red soup back in the center of the table. She faced Harrison with the spicy portion, and pressed the heating button on the side of the table. A strong spicy smell wafted over immediately. A golden dragon's nostrils flapped quickly, and then it turned its head to sneeze. What is this smell?" All the giant dragons squinted their eyes. This smell was too pungent. It was really unbearable for the dragons. "This is the insanely spicy that only real men would dare to try." Harrison covered his nose and leaned back. He was secretly glad that he had ordered the spicy dish. Indeed, only perverts could withstand the insanely spicy dish. He wondered if these giant dragons would go crazy after eating it. "We can't lose to the other party in terms of presents." All the giant dragons looked at each other, and had the same thought. Isn't it just a little spicy? This is nothing. It's just ordinary," Jinx said casually. He picked up a chili floating on the red soup with his chopsticks, and looked at Fox provocatively as he said, "Want one?" After saying that, He chewed on the dried chili with crunching sounds. Halfway through chewing, Jink's face had already started to turn red. This was no longer just a simple spiciness. The suffocating spiciness made his taste buds hurt. The numbing sensation seemed to reach straight to his soul. He even felt like his soul had left his body. His mind was blank, and his eyes were white. Fuck, this boss put poison in the chili. A thought flashed through Jink's mind immediately. Then, he regained his vision. However, his mouth was still burning from the spiciness, and his forehead was full of sweat. He looked at Fox, who was looking at him sideways, and squeezed out a smug smile. Are you scared now? Fuck, this guy is crazy. Fox's heart skipped a few beats, but his expression was still calm. I'm not going to argue with a fool. Harrison got used to the spiciness very quickly. He let go of his nose, and then picked up a piece of tripe with his chopsticks. He imitated Mr. Mac and the others, and started to cook the tripe in the rolling grid in front of him. The table was very big, and so was the 9-grid hot pot. Although it was divided into 9 sections, each section was almost equivalent to a small pot. It was more than enough for one person to cook the hot pot. Moreover, the heating of these 9 squares should be independent. Every square seemed to be boiling at the same time. There was no situation where the heat in the middle was strong and the sides were lukewarm. The tripe floated up and down in the boiling hot and spicy soup pot and was covered in a layer of red soup. Then, it was dipped in the dipping sauce that had just been prepared and fed into his mouth. The spicy broth exploded in the mouth like a pioneer, followed by the crispy tripe. It was as thin as a leaf, but it didn't have the slightest hardness or toughness when chewed. The crispy texture was completely unexpected, making people unable to stop eating. This tripe is amazing. Harrison was full of admiration. He didn't think that he could cook such delicious food. Harrison picked up another piece of tripe with his chopsticks and began to cook. His expression was serious and focused as if he was doing something very sacred. He threw away all distracting thoughts and made every movement an operation of his to be in the most perfect state in order to let the tripe be in the most perfect state. The 8 giant dragons at the dining table were all staring at that piece of tripe in Harrison's hand. It was a small and thin piece of tripe, but it had to go up and down in the pot several times. Just looking at it was enough to give them a headache. However, the way this little fatty ate was really a little tempting. Another piece of tripe wrapped in red soup was done. Harrison put it into his mouth in one gulp. He squinted his eyes and chewed with a look of enjoyment. His eyebrows twitched spiritedly, and his expression was full of bliss. The crisp sound of his teeth chewing on the tripe made everyone who heard it feel like their teeth were enjoying it. Gulp. All the giant dragons swallowed their saliva almost at the same time. Damn it, this little fatty is eating too happily, isn't he? All the giant dragons looked at the ingredients for the 10 people beside them, but they had a headache. They didn't know where to start. Seems like we still have to look at the manual. Jinx picked up that hot pot manual and read it seriously with a frown. The other 3 golden dragons also copied him and flipped through the manual. This food was different from what they had eaten before, and they had to cook it themselves. This was a huge test for them. Fox looked at the ingredients beside him, and then at the boiling pot in front of him. He frowned, and turned to look at Elizabeth, who was serving the dishes to the customers at the side. He ordered, "You, come over and cook the hot pot for me." Many customers who had already started to cook the hot pot turned to look at Fox and Elizabeth. What is this fellow trying to do? Is he purposely making things difficult for Miss Elizabeth? Elizabeth's movements froze. She put down the pot gently, and turned to look at Fox. The restaurant's rules are that the customers should cook the hot pot themselves. The service staff will not participate in the cooking. I'm eating here, but you want me to cook for myself. What kind of bullshit rule is this? Fox leaned back in his chair, and looked at Elizabeth arrogantly. I am a noble giant dragon. My hands are used to fight, not to do lowly things like cooking. Aren't you a service staff? Come over and cook all these dishes for me now. This is what you should do. Elizabeth clenched her fists, but her expression was still restrained. She didn't want to affect Amy's because of her, nor did she want the people in the restaurant to be implicated because of her. She knew very well that this dragon scum, Fox, could do anything. When Fox saw Elizabeth's expression, he became even more fearless. "Didn't you say that customers are gods? I order you to come over now. Cook all the ingredients for us respectfully, and then put them into my mouth. Otherwise, I won't let this matter rest." The commotion had attracted the attention of many customers. Everyone looked at Fox with disgust. Such a scum appearing at Amy's was really ruining their appetites. Didn't he see that the service staff was already running away to serve the dishes? This guy actually wanted Miss Elizabeth to cook the hot pot for him. How shameless. Elizabeth pursed her lips and hesitated for a moment. Then, she gritted her teeth and walked forward. I'll cook for you." At this moment, Yarbemia ran past Elizabeth and came to the table. She picked up a pair of chopsticks and was about to pick up the duck intestines. "MIA." Elizabeth stopped and looked at Yarbemia's back. She clenched her fists. "Who wants a lowly half-dragon like you?" Fox frowned and shouted angrily. He looked up at Yarbemia, but his voice suddenly stopped. He was shocked. "She's one of us." Jinx had already stood up and looked at Yarbemia in surprise. "MIA, come here." Right at this moment, a gentle voice sounded. Meg had already arrived at the entrance of the restaurant. He waved at MIA with a cold expression. Chapter 1245. Boss. Yarbemia, who was a little frightened by Fox's scolding, turned around and saw Meg waving at her from the door. Her eyes reddened immediately, but she was a little hesitant about whether she would draw the anger of these customers onto her boss if she went over. "Come here," Meg repeated. Yarbemia immediately put down her chopsticks and walked towards Meg. "Wait." Fox and Jinx called out almost at the same time. However, Yarbemia did not hesitate this time. She walked straight to Meg's side and hid behind him before sneaking a peek over there. These fellows indeed looked like bad guys. They looked so scary and not friendly at all. Fox's face was filled with shock and anger. He was angry that this little waitress dared to ignore his words. He was shocked that this woman was actually a golden dragon. If he remembered correctly, the last time he was here, she was only a lowly half-race. Jinx and the other golden dragons were also shocked. They were 100% sure that this little girl had an extremely pure golden bloodline, purer than any other golden dragon on Golden Dragon Island. However, Jinx clearly remembered that he had seen this little girl the last time he came. He did not have any special impression of her then, and only vaguely remembered that there was a half-dragon waitress like her. What happened to her during this period of time? She actually successfully awakened the golden bloodline and became a real golden dragon. Meg shielded MIA behind him, and calmly said to Fox and Jinx, "MIA is still young. If there's anything, please tell me. If you have any requests, feel free to state them. If I agree to one of your requests, consider it my loss." Mammoth's reputation was really established in Chaos City. He even had the title of the City Lord's Castle's senior consultant now, so he could be considered half a member of the City Lord's Castle. With someone backing him, it was only right for him to be a little arrogant. Of course, even if they really fought, Meg was able to smash Fox into a pig's head with a sow, so he naturally had the confidence to beat him into a pig's head again. Mag's words made the customers smile knowingly. Boss Mag was indeed the boss. This was a ruthless person who even dared to reject a 10th-tier powerhouse's request for another bowl of tofu pudding. Their hearts were all put at ease. Elizabeth looked at Meg. Her eyes flashed and the corners of her mouth curled up. Somehow, she felt a sense of relief. "Do you know who I am? A mere restaurant owner dares to speak to me like this." Fox roared angrily. It was one thing for him to be insulted by Jinx and Elizabeth, but now, even this restaurant owner dared to speak to him like that. "Hey, uncle, have you ever seen a wild boar fall from the sky?" Amy popped out of nowhere and suddenly asked. Fox's expression instantly froze, and the air seemed to freeze as well. "Ha ha ha." Jinx burst out laughing. He leaned forward and backward, and said, "Fox, has your legendary story become so well known that even little children know about it?" The other golden dragons also laughed wildly without holding back. Harrison, who was silently eating hot pot while watching the show, instantly got the joke. Then, he choked, and turned his head away with a painful and hideous smile. The spiciness was fermenting in his nose, but he still had to control his laughter. Didn't they say not to tell jokes when others were eating? Fox looked at Amy, and the veins on his forehead were throbbing. He wanted to swallow her whole. However, his gaze soon found the two big bosses in the restaurant staring at him. It was the gaze of death. The little spark that had just risen in his heart was extinguished instantly. He did not want to experience that suffocating feeling at the entrance of the restaurant again. Moreover, this time, no one was going to speak up for him. As the saying goes, don't expose people's shortcomings when scolding them. Amy is really a master of mine. Meg looked at Amy with satisfaction. When it came to enemies, he had to let them feel the coldness of winter. There was no need to talk about morality. Fox did not dare to touch Amy. His gaze landed on Meg again, and he coldly said, "I'm the customer who paid you. Now, I want your waiters to serve me. Are you unhappy? Sir, the hot pot is already in front of you, and all the dishes have been served. The service provided by the restaurant is all in place. What else are you unhappy about?" Meg asked with a smile. "Do I want the pot and the dishes? I'm a frost dragon. How can I do such things myself? I just want the waiters to cook it for me, and then feed me mouthful by mouthful," Fox said arrogantly. "If you don't want to do it, then why are you sitting in the designated hot pot area? Are you here to watch Chili swim?" Meg looked at Fox as if he was looking at a retarded child. "Moreover, are you unable to move your hands, or is your brain not working well? Why do you need someone to feed you mouthful by mouthful? Sorry, if you want this kind of service, please go home and ask your mother to remake you. This restaurant does not provide it." You. Fox was furious, but he was rendered speechless by Meg's rebuttal. He could not say a word for a long time. Fart. Vanessa, who was chewing on a enoki mushroom, spat it out. Enoki mushroom hung on Randy's face, who was sitting opposite her. Sorry, it's Mr. Mac. Mr. Mac's words are too funny." Vanessa looked at Randy apologetically. Laura, who was beside them, quickly took out a silk handkerchief and handed it to Randy, trying hard to hold back her laughter. The customers also laughed. Many of them who were eating hot pot choked. They coughed and laughed at the same time. It was really painful and happy at the same time. At the same time, the customers also reached a consensus. Chapter 1246. Looking at the customers who stood up one by one, the frost dragons who had slammed the table and stood up to support Fox swallowed their saliva at the same time. Then, they naturally turned around and sat back down. They picked up their chopsticks and began to cook the duck intestines obediently. "You want to tear down Amy's?" an elder in the Grey Temple's uniform asked Fox with a cold gaze. 10th tier powerhouse. Fox immediately felt the strong pressure coming from the other party, and judging from the other party's identity in the Grey Temple, he could tell that the other party was one of the 4 deputy lords. "How are you going to tear it down?" A 9th tier demon looked at Fox maliciously. The aura of a peak 9th tier demon was not weaker than Fox's at all. He twisted his neck, and a cracking sound was heard. "Why don't you start from my old bones?" Novan, who was sitting opposite Crassus, asked with a smile. The customers who were powerful and the customers who were just ordinary people all stood up slowly at this moment and looked at Fox unkindly. This fellow was going to destroy their holy land and insult their faith. This plot is not right. Fox panicked when he felt the stares from the big shots. He did not expect Meg to respond so shamelessly. What could he do? Even Frost Dragon Island was not enough for these beasts to tear down. He would not dare to force himself to tear it down. He would probably die a few times on the spot. I was just joking. To build a harmonious society, it starts with me. How could I tear down such a beautiful restaurant? Fox said with a forced smile. His expression was ugly as if he had eaten a fly. I like this restaurant. I love hot pot. A smile appeared on Elizabeth's face as she relaxed completely. She turned to look in the direction of the kitchen. She didn't expect that Mag would be able to use such an amazing method to make Fox look so pathetic. It was even more satisfying than beating him up. The customers this time are too amazing. Yarbemia looked at the customers who stood up one after another with stars in her eyes. She had never thought that so many strangers would support the restaurant and them. This feeling of being cared for and protected was really good. Of course, this was all because of the boss. The boss treated food with sincerity and made the customers voluntarily guard the restaurant. The Vice Lord of the Grey Temple walked over and scooped a bowl of red soup from the pot in front of Fox. He placed it in front of him and gestured, "Cheers." Fox's face turned green as he looked at the insanely spicy red soup with red chili and chili oil floating in the air. This is a chance for you to express your love. If you miss it, there won't be another chance. That mouthful of chili just now was enough to make his soul leave his body. With this bowl of red soup and chili, Fox would probably ascend to heaven. Fox looked at the malicious gazes around him. He felt that if he did not drink this bowl of red soup today, he would not be able to walk out of this place. But this red soup, he swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and his throat began to burn even before he swallowed it. "You're not eating." The Vice Palace Master's voice turned even colder. "Cheers." Fox, who sensed the killing intent, lifted the scalding bowl with both hands and drank a mouthful of red oil soup. The scalding hot oil, accompanied by a violent spicy taste, rushed into his mouth instantly. TSK, Fox clearly heard a soft sound, and his taste buds were all burned to death before they could even cheer. Fox's face turned red immediately, and it quickly spread to his neck and head. His entire body turned red, and white steam rose from the top of his head as if he was in a sauna. The terrifying spicy taste stimulated his scalded wounds violently. Fox's mind was completely blank, and his eyes were also filled with colors. It was as if he had gone blind. The burning sensation made him want to open a hole in his head so that the heat could dissipate slightly. The scalding red soup flowed down his throat like a blunt knife, slicing his throat inch by inch. That feeling was countless times more painful than being killed with a knife. His body began to tremble uncontrollably, and it was not any easier than being tortured. The thick soup entered his stomach, and the heat had yet to dissipate when it exploded in his stomach like a bomb. His stomach began to cramp, and the pain inside his body was not any easier than breaking his limbs. Rip! With a crisp sound, Fox's clothes burst into pieces, and dragon scales appeared on his body immediately after. His body also expanded rapidly, and the chair behind him was crushed into pieces. He turned into a 30-meter tall frost dragon in the blink of an eye. Roar! The frost dragon raised his head and roared angrily. At the same time, he spat out a red pillar of fire. Fuck, is this hot pot drugged? It can even change the attributes. Jinx was shocked. This was the first time he had seen a frost dragon spitting fire in his life. The other 3 frost dragons were also shocked, but they were all big bosses, so they did not dare to say anything. They could only look at Fox worriedly. Harrison hugged the bowl and trembled. He did not forget to scoop up the duck intestine from the pot and put it into his bowl before heaving a sigh of relief. He almost became old. However, looking at the 30-meter tall frost dragon next to him, he was suddenly a little worried about himself. He was the one who recommended the insanely spicy. Would this frost dragon, who had been smashed in the head by a pig, come and settle the score with him after everything was over? That deputy lord looked up at the enlarged Fox, and calmly asked, "You've become so big. Do you want to fight?" In the eyes of a powerhouse, there was no difference between a worm and a bigger worm. Fox knew this very well, so he immediately shrunk into a pocket-sized dragon about 3 meters tall, but he still maintained his dragon form. His body was recovering, and he could not continue to maintain his human form. He could only turn into his dragon form. With a long face, he said, "My lord, don't misunderstand. I can only turn into this. Since you like hot pot, then finish the dishes and the soup. If you want to tear down Amy's in the future, come and tell me first. If I don't get to eat the red braised pork, then I will tear down Frost Dragon Island," the deputy lord said seriously. "Yes, yes." Fox quickly nodded. He was very aggrieved, but he did not dare to show it on his face. He even had the thought of dying. Seeing that Fox had admitted defeat, the customers returned to their seats and continued to enjoy the food. Jinx glanced at Fox, who was obediently eating the hot pot, and then stared at Yabemia, who was busy walking among the customers in the restaurant. He muttered to himself, "I have to talk to this little girl later. The child of a golden dragon cannot wander outside." Chapter 1247. Uncle, your duck intestine is going to be old if you don't scoop it out. Harrison couldn't help but remind Jinx, who was in a daze. Old. Jinx took his chopsticks out of the hot pot and looked at the curled-up duck intestine with confusion. Isn't it already dead? Old means past the best time to eat it, Harrison explained helplessly. Indeed, some terms were not universal. Then let me try this duck intestine. Jinx didn't care about Harrison's words, and put the piece of duck intestine into his mouth. The spiciness was still the main theme, but after chewing the insanely spicy chili, his resistance to insanely spicy had increased significantly. He didn't care about his burning taste buds, and chewed on the duck intestine. Apart from the numbing spiciness, the crispy duck intestine gave Jinx's teeth a new and refreshing experience. As his taste buds gradually got used to the spiciness, the fragrance under the spiciness began to show its power. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became, and the coldness from sitting in the snow was also dispelled. Delicious. Jinx gave a thumbs up. However, this small piece of duck intestine wasn't enough to fill the gaps between his teeth, so he picked up 2 plates of duck intestine and poured it into the red soup pot in front of him. Duck intestine isn't eaten like this. Harrison raised his hand to stop him, but it was too late. He looked at the duck intestine that had already been poured into the hot pot. This was blasphemy. Harrison tried his best to control his emotions as he said, "Duck intestine has to be dipped with chopsticks. The best time to eat it is when the duck intestine is dipped 8 times. Only then will the duck intestine have a soul. The way you eat it is too sissy. It's not suitable for us giant dragons." Jinx pursed his lips in disdain. He picked up a plate of beef and poured it into the hot pot. He stirred it with his chopsticks, and started eating when the soup boiled again. That's a good idea. The eyes of the golden dragons, who were still carefully calculating the time, lit up, and they all followed suit. Otherwise, with their 10 portions, they might not be able to finish it by tomorrow morning. This is really silly. Harrison swallowed the last few words for the sake of his own safety. Out of sight, out of mind, he continued to dip his tripe elegantly. The irritable and insanely spicy didn't let the dragons off the hook. Just as the dragons were praising how delicious the hot pot was, they started transforming uncontrollably. In the end, they could only shrink to the size of Fox and continue to stand up and eat the hot pot. Under the gazes of the dragons, Harrison, the little fatty, continued to sit quietly and enjoy the hot pot. This also attracted everyone's attention. This was a true hero. The novel way of eating hot pot brought a brand new dining experience to the guests. It even gave many people a strange illusion. "Hubby, I think my culinary skills have improved greatly. Let me cook for you at home in the future," Bonnie said confidently as she took a bite of the potato. The pale-faced Vicenio had just recovered from the frenzied attacks in the afternoon. Hearing Bonnie's words, he hurriedly shook his head. "Why? You don't think my cooking is good?" Bonnie pulled a long face. "No, I'm just worried that the oil will stain your delicate little hands. How can I let you do such a thing?" Vicenio hurriedly shook his head with a shy smile. "That's true." Bonnie raised her pinky finger and looked at her delicate little hands. It was such a pity to use them to do housework. "That's right. My hands have more important things to do." Bonnie's hand pinched Vicenio's thigh under the table. She licked her bright red lips, and her smile gradually turned wretched. Vicenio's throat moved. He suddenly wanted to go next door and order 2 more Ruggiamos. Who could resist that? "I think the best cooked vegetable is the lotus root slice. It's crispy and delicious." "It's too delicious." Vanessa chewed on the lotus root slice. It was just right for the hardness, and didn't put much pressure on her teeth. However, Abraham shook his head, and said, "I think the enoki mushroom is better." The enoki mushroom has absorbed the essence of the red soup. It's fresh and delicious, and tastes even better than ordinary mushrooms. It's the king of the vegetarian hot pot. What's so good about vegetables? Are you sure you don't want to try the pig's brain? This pig's brain is more tender than tofu pudding. After soaking in the red soup, the taste is even better. It's simply too dreamy. Randy picked up the ladle and scooped up a pig's brain from the red soup. He looked at everyone and recommended it seriously. Vanessa and Laura shook their heads at the same time. This pig's brain looked scarier than they had expected. When they thought about how it was dug out from a pig's brain, they instantly lost their desire to eat it. Can you share some with me to try? Abraham asked hesitantly. Since you treated me to a meal yesterday, I'll bear the pain and share half of the pig's brain with you. Randy had a pained expression on his face. He scooped half of the pig's brain into his bowl and put the other half into Abraham's bowl. Abraham picked up the ladle and scooped up half a ladle of the pig's brain. The pig's brain, which still had some traces of blood when it was put into the pot, had already turned completely white. It was wrapped in a layer of red soup and looked very tempting. The spicy red soup automatically removed all the fishy smell, and the spicy aroma mixed with a unique fragrance wafted over. As a glutton, this was also the first time Abraham tried an animal's brain. Before this, he had never heard of anyone eating a pig's brain. He finished half a ladle of pig's brain in one mouthful. The appropriate spiciness first made the taste buds tense up, and then the pig's brain melted in the mouth. The tender texture was indeed similar to tofu pudding, but the tofu pudding's texture was much more refreshing, while the pig's brain's texture was more soft and sticky. The fragrant taste blossomed on the tip of the tongue, and together with the spiciness, it brought about a unique and delicious enjoyment. This taste is simply amazing. Abraham was intoxicated. If the duck intestine and tripe were a beautiful song for the teeth, then this pig's brain was an existence that brought joy to the taste buds. After finishing half of the pig's brain in a few mouthfuls, Abraham still felt that he was not satisfied. He raised his hand and ordered 3 more pig's brains. Listen to me, right? Randy was a little proud. Even pig's brains can be used as an ingredient. There's really nothing that can't be used in hot pot. Mr. Mac's creation will most likely leave a thick mark in the history of food and beverage. Abraham nodded and could not help but sigh. Only Mr. Mac can be the first to carry on the legacy of the past and open up a new path for the future. Randy nodded in agreement. If a chef only made a family dish to the extreme, then he could only be considered a good chef, but not a master chef. However, Mr. Mac was different. Every new dish he made was a surprise. His exquisite and unique cooking methods had the ability to subvert the current food and beverage industry. It was very normal for a hot pot meal to take 1 to 2 hours, so many customers waited for a long time before they could get a seat. Meanwhile, the fox finally finished the last mouthful of soup after the customers changed seats. It flew away with blue flames spurting out of its mouth. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1248. It seems like I was wrong. He is the most talented frost dragon in the history of the frost dragon tribe. Jinx looked up at the frost dragon that was spewing blue flames as it flew away. He lamented, he has actually evolved into a fire-breathing dragon. Although the other frost dragons did not drink the soup base, a cloud of white smoke rose from their heads, and their snow-white bodies turned pink. All of them stared at Jinx with their red eyes. Jinx, don't you golden dragons take advantage of us? The frost dragons are not people you can touch as you wish. You'd better not cross the line. We frost dragons will not tolerate being bullied by other dragons. The frost dragon old man snorted coldly, spread his wings, and was about to lead the other 2 frost dragons away. Wait a minute. You haven't settled the bill. Right at this moment, a weak voice sounded. Settle the bill? The dragons looked around, and finally lowered their heads to see Anna, who was holding a small ledger in her hand. Anna took half a step back instinctively after being glared at by everyone. However, she still looked up, and said, each of you ordered 10 sets of dishes and a set of insanely spicy soup base. The total cost is 200,400 copper coins. 4 chairs were damaged, and we will compensate you according to the cost of each chair at 500 copper coins. You will have to pay a total of 22,400 copper coins. Why is there so much? Are you trying to extort us? A frost dragon stared at Anna with its large eyes, its massive body casting a huge shadow over her. Every dish on the menu has a price. There are a total of 50 dishes. You can count them yourself. Anna took out the bill and raised it above her head. Although she was a little scared, she did not back down at all. The giant dragon's eyes swept across the zeros, and he felt dizzy. This was not a problem that he could solve. Pay up for your meal, or I will kill you all. Right at this moment, Amy walked past from behind with her magic caster's staff in her arms, and mumbled something. The frost dragon shuddered as it recalled Fox's example. It immediately took out its money pouch, counted enough dragon crystals, and placed them on the table. It then flew away with the other 2 frost dragons in a sorry state. Jinx and the rest were almost done eating, and took the initiative to settle the bill. They looked at Harrison, who was slumped on the chair with a satisfied expression, and said with surprise, "Little fatty, you're not that big, but you have quite a big appetite." Burp. Harrison let out a long burp and heaved a sigh of relief. He helplessly said, "I ordered too much, but I didn't want to waste it, so I could only stuff myself with it." At this time, the restaurant was about to close. The designated hot pot area was no longer receiving customers. Some customers who were full were not in a hurry to leave. They sat and chatted, letting their stomachs digest for a while. Otherwise, they would not be able to walk at all. Jinx and the rest rested for a while before they transformed back into their human forms. They were not in a hurry to leave. They chatted softly for a while, and their gazes were fixed on Yarbemia, who was clearing the table. However, they did not disturb him abruptly. Did these fellows still find out? Elizabeth frowned. Although the Golden Dragon tribe treated their tribesmen very well, she did not want to let MIA go to the Golden Dragon Island alone now. No matter how beautiful a place was described, there was still a dark side. The Golden Dragon Island was also a place where the strong were respected. In this world, MIA would definitely encounter some unfair treatment if she went alone. MIA also felt the few golden dragons staring at her. She learned a lot of information about her father from Elizabeth. Their grandmother was from the Golden Dragon tribe, so she was different from Elizabeth and had the Golden Dragon bloodline. Also, when she saw them transform because of the hot pot, it was the same as her usual transformation. She was indeed a golden dragon. Unlike Fox and the other frost dragons who were full of hostility, she felt some goodwill from these golden dragons. Now that they had stayed behind and were chatting at the side instead of leaving, some strange thoughts appeared in her mind. These fellows want to domesticate MIA? After cooking the last dish, Meg came out of the kitchen, and saw Jinx and the rest who had not left. His eyes narrowed slightly. Meg already knew that Yarbemia and Elizabeth were sisters. When he was reading the information about the dragons yesterday, he saw the portrait of Rankster, who had left a deep mark in the history of the Golden Dragon Island. It was almost the same as the portrait of her father that the system had drawn for MIA that day. From Elizabeth's behavior, he could confirm that they had already acknowledged each other. It was just that they did not announce it to the public, so he pretended not to know. This also explained very well why Elizabeth was willing to entrust herself to Yarbemia when she was on the verge of death. Although they had the same father but different mothers, they were ultimately sisters, and the only family they had in this world. Therefore, although MIA had always wanted to look for her father, she could not find him even if she went to the Golden Dragon Island. When the sisters reunited, Elizabeth rejected the Frost Dragon's apology and the Golden Dragon's invitation. No one knew what choice MIA would make. From Meg's selfish point of view, he naturally hoped that MIA could stay. He would never be able to find such an obedient and sensible employee who did so much but ate so little. However, going to the Golden Dragon Island might be a whole new world for MIA. She was no longer the inferior half-dragon who was bullied by the black-hearted boss and fainted in front of the restaurant. Chapter 1249. What tempting conditions. If a normal wandering dragon were to suddenly have a big boss tell you that you are a genius after wandering outside for more than a decade, and now we are going to bring you home, give you a luxurious car and a mansion, and even give you the best teachers to make you a big boss, probably not many people would be able to withstand that. Everyone looked at Mia with some reluctance. Could it be that they were going to lose another little friend? Elizabeth also looked at Mia. She didn't ask Mia to do anything just now. Going to Golden Dragon Island might bring more challenges, but it was indeed a shortcut to becoming a powerhouse. The powerful Golden Dragon Senior could give Mia more guidance, and some of the holy lands on Golden Dragon Island were also more suitable for Mia to cultivate. Is Big Sister Mia leaving? Amy grabbed Meg's hand and was a little reluctant. Big Sister Mia was too good to her, and she couldn't bear for her to leave. Meg didn't say anything. He respected Mia's choice. This was also his promise to them when they first entered the restaurant. Yarbemia wasn't an ordinary wandering dragon, after all, because she was adopted midway. But I like being a service staff member at Mammoth. I like it here, and I want to continue staying here. I don't want to go to Dragon Island. Mia looked at Jinx and shook her head to reject without any hesitation. You want to continue being a service staff member and not go back to Golden Dragon Island to become a powerhouse? Jinx felt that he had heard wrongly, so he repeated his question. Yes, I want to stay at Mammoth. Mia nodded firmly. What's so good about this restaurant? You can't become a powerhouse if you stay here, and it will be a waste of your talent. If you go to Golden Dragon Island, you will be able to grow very quickly, and you might even become the chief of the Golden Dragons. Isn't that better than being a service staff member at this restaurant? Jinx was puzzled. He couldn't understand why Mia would make such a choice. You can eat the most delicious food in the world for free in this restaurant, but there's none on Golden Dragon Island. The restaurant has the best boss in the world, the best companions in the world, and the two cutest babies in the world. Golden Dragon Island doesn't have that. The restaurant can receive all kinds of guests every day. You can listen to their stories that happened all over the continent. You can't hear them on Golden Dragon Island. Besides, I'm not only a waiter at Mammoth, but I'm also the manager of an ice cream shop. The children are still waiting for me to open the shop and make ice cream for them every day. If I leave, they will definitely be very sad. But if I don't go to Golden Dragon Island, no one will be sad. Yarbemia explained clearly. Jinx opened his mouth and thought for a long while, but he was actually at a loss for words. Yarbemia bowed to Jinx and sincerely said, "Thank you for treating me as one of your people, but I just want to stay in Amy's with Boss and my adorable companions." What an obedient and adorable child. Jinx's feelings were very complicated. It was naturally a very good thing to bring home a child with extraordinary talent, but seeing how obedient Mia was, he couldn't say anything harsh. After hesitating for a long time, he took out a jade tablet and passed it to Mia. This is a cultivation technique of the Golden Dragon tribe. Take it back and take a look. If there's anything you don't understand, just ask me when I come to the restaurant for a meal. Thank you. Mia received the jade tablet with both hands and bowed deeply to Jinx. She knew from Elizabeth that cultivation techniques were precious. Because Elizabeth was learning the cultivation technique of the Ice Empress Dragon tribe, it wasn't suitable for her. So, she hadn't started cultivating yet, and only learned flying and some combat skills. Elizabeth also looked at the jade tablet in Mia's hand with surprise. The cultivation technique of a tribe was very precious. She didn't expect Jinx to give it to Mia just like that. In that case, Mia would have a suitable cultivation technique to cultivate. And nothing. Jinx scratched his head, and then looked at Elizabeth, and said, "Miss Elizabeth, if you change your mind, you can tell me anytime. The Golden Dragon tribe welcomes you." After saying that, Jinx transformed into a giant dragon and left with the other 3 giant dragons. "Jinx, this isn't in line with the rules, right?" A giant dragon asked after flying out of Chaos City. "Yes. She's not willing to go to Golden Dragon Island, and she hasn't officially become one of us. You might be punished if the elders find out that you've imparted the cultivation technique to her rashly," another giant dragon said worriedly. "Then, what should we do?" We can't just watch such a good seedling waste her time outside and be bullied because she doesn't have the ability, right? That's not the style of the Golden Dragon tribe, Jinx retorted. All the giant dragons were silent. That was also the reason why they didn't stop him directly. I will personally report this matter to the elders. I believe that the elders will agree with my actions. As for why she doesn't want to leave that restaurant, it's indeed very difficult to escape from Mr. Mac's clutches after eating such delicious food. However, a human's lifespan is only 100 years. To us, 100 years is just a short period of time. When those humans gradually die off, she will naturally return to the dragon tribe, Jinx said with a smile. However, when he thought about how he might not be able to eat such delicious food again after 100 years, he felt a little melancholic. Big sister MIA, you're not leaving. That's great. Amy jumped into Mia's arms and kissed her on the cheek happily. I thought you were going to leave suddenly like them. Barbara shrugged. Her face was expressionless, but she was obviously relieved. Big sister MIA is also the most adorable person, Anna said with a smile. Her eyes were a little red. Of course I can't bear to leave all of you. I want to be with all of you forever. I want to stay in the restaurant forever. I have endless delicious food, and all of you are the best. MIA kissed Amy on the cheek and patted Anna's head. Then, she gave everyone an energetic smile. Meg's face was also full of smiles. This was probably the most perfect outcome. It didn't delay Mia's cultivation, and she didn't have to leave. All right, everyone's workload has doubled today. It's been hard on you. Go back and have a good rest. I will put up a recruitment notice in the next few days to recruit a few more employees for the restaurant. That way, everyone won't be so busy, Meg said to everyone. That's great. Gina still has some difficulty communicating with the customers. It would be perfect if we could have 1 or 2 more colleagues to help serve the dishes, MIA said with a smile. Father, are you looking for a few more beautiful ladies? Amy asked excitedly. Chapter 1250. Meg used a very serious tone to explain to Amy the difference between a waitress and a normal lady, as well as the difference between looking for a waitress for the restaurant and looking for a lady for himself. But the restaurant is yours, Amy said seriously. There was a sudden silence, and everyone was looking at Mag with a weird gaze. All right, let's disperse. Go home and sleep. Meg waved his hand calmly, not wanting to argue with the children. After the crowd dispersed, Amy followed Meg into the restaurant. She still asked curiously, what kind of waitress should we look for this time? I have a big sister elf, a big sister mermaid, a big sister dragon, a big sister moon, a big sister orc, and a big sister bat. What else can I find? We can also get a troll sister, a gnome sister, and a dwarf sister, Anna said after some serious thought. Meg stopped in his tracks and thought about it seriously. He quickly rejected the suggestion. He could not get the looks of the 3 races. Dwarfs were limited by their height, so it was not easy for them to complete the restaurant's work. Trolls, on the other hand, had to eat outside the restaurant due to their huge size, let alone be waitresses. As for the gnomes, Meg only had the image of green goblins in his mind. Although some of the gnomes he had seen recently had different skin types and not only had green skin, because they had lived in the underground caverns for a long time, they always had a sickly feeling. Moreover, because they were too thin and weak, they looked like they were just skin and bones. With their aesthetic standards, they would not be suitable candidates for waitresses. Anyway, we have so many customers. Let's put up an announcement and slowly choose. Meg smiled and shook his head. He did not let the 2 clever little imps continue to come up with ideas. All right, then let's help Sister Gina clean up the eggshells. Amy walked toward Gina, who was sorting out the mud shells of the beggar's chicken that the customers had eaten today. I'll go too. Gina jogged over. Every night, Gina would spend some time sorting out the mud shells into individually packaged small portions. 1 portion was enough for one of her clansmen to break free from the curse. After this period of testing, she had already experimented with a standard dosage. A beggar's chicken's mud shell could lift the curse for 5 clansmen. In order to make it easier for her to measure, Meg bought her an electronic scale and a batch of plastic bags from the system, so the sorting work became more efficient. With the help of Meg and the rest, Gina only used a dozen minutes to distribute all the mud casings. "Thank you." She kissed Amy and Anna before giving Meg a big hug. "You're not allowed to raise your legs next time." Meg helplessly put down Gina's long legs that were wrapped around him naturally. Everything about Gina was good except for this habit of hers. If Irina were to see this in the future, he would never be able to clear his name. "Yes." Gina stuck out her tongue embarrassedly. She used the crystal ball to store the separated mud casings. She looked at Meg and asked expectantly, "Mr. Meg, can I participate in the battle the day after tomorrow? If you want to participate, you can come along too." Meg nodded. Gina was not a brainless, big-breasted vase. She had the ability of an 8th tier. Although the former was also valid, it would be more or less a form of deterrence if she came along. Also, with her around, it would be easier to communicate with Lantiste. "All right." Gina smiled sweetly. She also wanted to fight with everyone. After washing up the two little fellows, Meg lay on the bed and told them a story. Amy had already fallen asleep, but Anna was still looking at Meg with her eyes wide open. "Anna, do you still not want to sleep?" Meg asked Anna. "Uncle Meg, can I go with everyone?" Anna asked softly. She pursed her lips and hesitated. "I miss Sister Shirley and Sister Gina." Meg looked at Anna, and his heart ached. Shirley and Gina were the ones who saved her from those baddies, and she lived with Shirley for a period of time. After being separated for a period of time, it was normal for her to miss them. However, he was not sure if the battle the day after tomorrow would turn into a chaotic battle. In the chaos, even he could not guarantee that he would be able to protect Anna, who had no ability to protect herself. "If it's not convenient, then I won't go. As long as you can save Sister Shirley and the rest," Anna quickly said. She lowered her head as if she had done something wrong. "Anna, I know you miss them a lot, and you want to see them too." Mag patted Anna's head gently, and said in a gentle voice, "However, we're most likely going to face a very intense battle the day after tomorrow. There are many bad guys, and they're all very powerful. Everyone has to devote themselves to the battle, so I'm afraid I won't be able to take you with me this time." "Millimeter." Anna nodded obediently. She looked up at Meg. "Then, you must be careful too. Don't worry. We will help them out successfully. They will be fine." Meg nodded with a smile, and said, "So, our little Anna has to sleep well too. When I see Shirley, I will ask her to come back and visit you." "Millimeter." Anna nodded with a smile on her face, and closed her eyes obediently. Meg got up, switched off the warm light at the head of the bed, and went out softly. He was not in a hurry to sleep. Instead, he went into the study, took out the information about the elves, and started reading it seriously again. The day after tomorrow, they would be facing a battle with an extremely unequal number of people. Although Lantiste had a strong army of powerhouses, there were still many unknowns when it came to fighting on land. He had to make full use of those 15 minutes of peak time. The target of his attack and the extent to which he had to do all had to be calculated and analyzed. "Elizabeth, I will tear you into pieces." In a valley, Fox, who had transformed into a 100-meter-long giant dragon, was lying on the edge of a cliff and roaring with gritted teeth. "PFFF. PFFF," again, accompanied by two strange sounds. Fox's expression changed drastically. The 100-meter-long giant frost dragon transformed into a blue fire jet fighter and collided wildly in the valley. Finally, it fell into the valley dejectedly. Rodu, the royal palace's bedroom. The king turned his head to look at the queen, who was tossing and turning in bed, and consoled her. "Don't worry. Vanessa is with Abraham now. He will look after her. Also, I have sent people to protect her. No one can hurt her. Your Majesty, this lass has never been to such a far place before. Furthermore, she has left the Empire's borders. What should we do if she meets with bad people, or if something happens to her?" The queen was still depressed. She could not wait to fly over and bring Vanessa back. Vanessa brushed her teeth as she looked at Laura with a blissful smile on her face, and said, "Today's hot pot was so delicious. Let's have hot pot again tomorrow. M. Chapter 1251. This idiot is so childish that he wants to fight against the army of the wind forest, and he even wants to drag everyone in the restaurant with him. Isn't he in a hurry to die?" On the branch of a big tree, Camilla raised her head and took a big gulp of wine. She exhaled a mouthful of white smoke, and there was a trace of impatience and melancholy in her eyes. "Madam, Miss Gloria is bathing." At this moment, Caesar suddenly called out softly, "Where?" Camilla, who was originally sitting on the branch, instantly changed to hang upside down. She stared at the small window with the dim yellow light. Rip! Before she could see anything clearly, the curtains were pulled closed. "It's gone," Caesar said helplessly. "Life is really boring. When will Miss Gloria understand my feelings for her? What's so good about men? Lesbians are the king." Camilla sat back on the branch again, and took a big gulp of wine. She was a little melancholy. "Madam, if we go north and participate in that matter, will it affect the vampires?" Caesar asked Camilla. "Even if they know, it doesn't matter. When have the elves ever liked us demons? It's quite interesting to annoy those guys from the wind forest." Camilla pursed her lips, and her expression became a little strange. "But when I think about how we are going to save that woman, Irina, I feel a little uncomfortable. Why don't we not go?" Caesar was also a little trembling. Irina's notoriety was like thunder to the ears on the Demon Islands. When the demon mothers met their children who didn't sleep in the middle of the night, they would say, "If you cry again, Irina will come and take you away." Such a great demon king actually needed them to save him now. This feeling was indeed a little strange. Escape? That's not my character. Camilla's face was full of pride. She spread out her hands and turned into a huge black bat, flying into the dark night and disappearing without a trace. A qualified killer won't do such a childish thing as making faces behind the target. The opportunity to assassinate is always in an instant. If you don't seize this opportunity, you will be the one to die, Rex said seriously as he reached out and pulled out Connie, who was making faces behind him. "Master, how did you see me? I was invisible." Connie, who was wearing a set of tight black clothes, was grabbed by the collar. She was shocked. If it's only this level of concealment, any grade 7 person can sense your location. Rex put Connie on the ground, and reached out 2 fingers to pinch the slender and long dagger that sneakily poked out of her sleeves. Connie's exaggerated expressions is to attract the opponent's attention, and it's fatal for killers. "But I really can't learn how to pretend to be someone else." Connie put away her dagger, looking distressed. For the past few days, other than learning concealment and assassination techniques from her master, she also had to learn how to become different characters in different environments. The first 2 were still okay. With her outstanding talent, she improved very quickly. But when it came to role-playing, she was completely hopeless. She could only act as herself. Rex stared at Connie seriously for a while, then he suddenly laughed out loud. "Master, what are you laughing at? Although I'm a little stupid, you can't laugh at me." Connie blinked, and felt wronged. Rex shook his head, and said with a smile, "When I was learning how to act as someone else, I couldn't learn how to become someone else either. Because of my personality and that iconic bald head and eyes, I was easily noticed no matter where I was." Connie looked at Rex's head, which had grown hair, and asked curiously, "Then how did you learn it?" "I chose to give up." Rex shook his head, "But I still became the best assassin. I don't need to disguise myself, and I rarely even need to conceal myself. As long as I want to kill someone, I can kill them. In front of absolute power, any disguise and concealment are superfluous." Connie looked at Rex, who was looking at the starry sky at a 45-degree angle, and said with a complicated expression, "Master, you're exaggerating." "Ahem." Rex coughed dryly, and looked at Connie. He said with some emotion, "You're the first assassin I've met who can't disguise because you're not smart enough. This kind of situation is really rare. You're also the first person I've met who can turn an assassin into a warrior because you don't have hair." Connie also had a complicated expression. The two of them looked at each other in silence, and then laughed at the same time. The blood of the hunting cat flows in your body. I thought it was just a legend, but the power of the totem has really manifested in your body, so you have a very good concealment talent. You can hide your breath and voice to a great extent. This is what you rely on to become the best assassin, but it won't increase your power directly. Rex looked at Connie with a serious expression, and said, if you want to kill Gary before your brother is executed, then you have to follow my training strictly. Connie also kept the smile on his face after hearing that, and nodded seriously. Why didn't you leave with them just now? Elizabeth leaned against the headboard, and asked Yarbemia, who was looking at the golden jade token excitedly. Because I can't bear to leave everyone and you, sister. Yarbemia put down the jade token, and leaned her head on Elizabeth's shoulder gently. She smiled, and said, if I go to Golden Dragon Island, then I won't be able to lean on sister's shoulder like now. Elizabeth's gaze softened, and she reached out to stroke Yarbemia's head gently. She softly said, if you want to become a powerhouse, then you have to accept loneliness. That uncle gave me the cultivation technique just now, so I don't have to go to Golden Dragon Island to cultivate the Golden Dragon's technique. That way, I can also become more powerful, and chase away those baddies who want to hurt you. Yarbemia picked up the token with a determined gaze, but her expression quickly crumbled, and she helplessly said, but, how do I use this token? Why don't I see any cultivation technique? Drip your blood essence on the token, and undo the bloodline seal on the token. Then, you can check it. An ice crystal needle appeared in Elizabeth's hand, and she pinched one of Yarbemia's slender fingers. A drop of golden blood emerged from the tip of her finger, and landed on the golden jade pendant. The golden jade token immediately lit up with a dazzling golden light, and golden words appeared on the token one by one. At the same time, the shadow of a golden dragon appeared, and flashed across the token. Chapter 1252. Hot Pot's name spread throughout Chaos City's circle of friends overnight. Among the various circles of friends, the most discussed topic today was undoubtedly the somewhat mysterious and impactful Hot Pot. Let's have Hot Pot tonight. Let's go. This became a common conversation among many foodies when they asked for a meal. The subversive way of letting customers participate in the cooking was novel, and the standardized cooking time allowed customers to cook delicious food. This aroused many people's curiosity. However, the per capita expenditure of 1,000 plus limited many people's actions. Therefore, eating hot pot had become a luxurious thing. However, for foodies, DIY was also where the fun lay when they were cash-strapped. Hey, Shanshan, tell me how long it took to heat the various ingredients in the hot pot that you had last night. I'll try it when I get back tonight. A lady with long flaxen hair came forward and asked her colleague who was doing the accounting. Raina, just give up. I think the main point of hot pot is not the ingredients, but the rich and flavorful bottom of the pot. However, I don't know what other spices and condiments there are other than chili, so I can't tell you how to cook it. That lady called Shanshan looked up at Raina and handed her the accounting book. It's the end of the month. You'd better finish the review before you get off work today. Otherwise, the boss won't let you off. He threw all that heavy work to the two of us and scolded us all the time. Our monthly salary isn't even enough for us to eat a few good meals. I've had enough of such a boss. Rena's delicate face was filled with fatigue. Indeed. It would be great if I could become a waitress at Mammy Restaurant. I'd be able to eat Boss Mag's delicious food every day. Even if I'm a little busy at work, Boss Mag has such a good personality, and is also so handsome. I'm sure I'd be very happy working there. Shanshan was also full of anticipation. That's great. Raina's eyes lit up. Don't even think about it. The number of women who want to be Amy's service staff is enough to circle Chaos City 3 times. The women who want to be Mr. Mac are all beautiful and capable. As for us. Shanshan looked at the swimming ring on her stomach, and then at Raina. Raina's looks were rather delicate and pretty, and her figure was thin. However, she was dressed very casually and old-fashioned. Her slightly curly flaxen hair was casually tied up with a hemp rope, and she wore an old linen dress. If she were to stand next to the waitresses at Mammoth, she would definitely not match. That's true. That restaurant is so high class. They definitely wouldn't want someone like me. Raina nodded dejectedly, but her eyes soon lit up again. Although I can't become an employee, I can still go and watch them eat hot pot today. Maybe I can learn it quickly. I really hope you can succeed. In that case, I can go to your house often to have hot pot. Shanshan nodded with a smile. Her colleagues' professional standards were average, but she had a unique ability when it came to food. As long as she had seen someone cook food before, she could quickly make it taste 80 to 90% similar when she got home. However, that was the food from normal restaurants and roadside stalls. She didn't really believe that Raina could perfectly replicate Mr. Mac's food. Mr. Mac's food was one of a kind. I'd better finish my work first. Otherwise, that demoness will definitely come and find trouble with me again. Raina returned to her seat with the account book. During the lunch break, Gina received a flying fish reply from Lantiste. The High Priest of Lantiste would personally lead 400 Lantistian merfolk warriors to reinforce them. Among them were 10 10th tier powerhouses, 49th tier powerhouses, and the rest were 7th tier and 8th tier powerhouses. It was a rather luxurious and sincere reinforcement lineup. Meg lit up the secret letter and said to Gina, "Tell them that Mia and Elizabeth will set off to pick them up tonight. After that, they will head north together to reinforce the night elves." "All right." Gina nodded. She wrote another secret letter and stuffed it into the flying fish's stomach before releasing it. "Boss, although I really want to go with you, my master said that if I go, I might end up on the other side. Do you think I should go?" Connie yawned as she lay on the counter. Her eyes were a little dark, and she looked like she didn't have enough sleep. "I think you shouldn't." Meg looked at Connie. He felt that her master was quite good at judging people. "All right." Connie shrugged. She knew her place, too. It would be awkward if she got lost on the battlefield. Meow. Ugly Duckling walked over and lay down on her hand. It slept comfortably on her hand. "Ugly Duckling, you only know how to sleep after eating. Be careful not to become a pig," Connie said with disdain. She yawned and couldn't help but fall asleep on the counter. "Oh, yes. I have to write a recruitment advertisement." Meg suddenly remembered something important. The hot pot trial last night had fully exposed the restaurant's lack of manpower. Mia and the rest had to serve the customers in the normal area and the customers in the designated hot pot area. They ran back and forth in the restaurant, and the error rate increased by a few times. Moreover, they seemed to be in a hurry. This was not in line with the business philosophy that Meg had set for the restaurant. Hurried service staff would reduce the customers' dining experience and make them anxious to enjoy the delicacies. This was a problem that had to be solved as soon as possible. Meg took the small blackboard, and after thinking for a while, he started writing on it and hung it outside the door. In the evening, Mia and the rest came to work. They looked at Meg with strange expressions when they entered the door. "Boss, we saw your recruitment advertisement. Are you sure your requirements are really like that? Are the requirements too lax?" Meg was a little puzzled. "No, I just feel that it's a little too detailed, like that." Mia shook her head and deliberated over her words. "Looks aside, why do service staff have to care about the size of other people's breasts? Furthermore, buttocks have nothing to do with serving dishes, right? Or do you want to hire more than just service staff?" Barbara crossed her arms in front of her chest and rested her chin on the other hand as she looked at Meg with a scrutinizing expression. Everyone looked at Meg. Meg coughed softly and said, Actually, it's not what you think. The chest and waist measurements are just a rough range to filter out some people who don't meet the standards. Otherwise, the line for the interview would stretch all the way to the city gate. When I choose service staff, the most important thing is ability and reflexes." "Oh," Connie yawned and stretched. She looked at everyone and rubbed her sleepy eyes and said, "You're all here. Is it time to eat?" Everyone looked at Connie and then at Meg. They didn't say anything. "Okay, this was an accident." Meg blushed with shame. Chapter 1253. Mr. Mac is looking for a young and pretty waitress with a full bust and hips, a slim waist, and who can work in the kitchen and in the hall. This requirement really fits the needs of Mammis. Exactly. Look at all the waitresses at Mammis. Which one of them doesn't fit this requirement? Mr. Mac is really choosing waitresses based on his standards of choosing his wife. I used to fit the requirements, but ever since I met Mammis, this cute swimming ring is really making me feel autistic. Is it too late to change my gender now? I think Mr. Mac is seriously discriminating against us men. If we want to be flirtatious, what can women do? Have you forgotten that young man with a bow on his waist who was performing in the square 2 days ago? Mammis' recruitment notice quickly caused a huge commotion among the customers in the queue, and became the hottest topic of the day. The detailed requirements had already filtered out most of the people, and those who didn't fit the requirements could only watch the show. Meanwhile, some of the ladies who fit the requirements were already planning to fire their boss and join Mammis, so that they could reach the pinnacle of their lives. The happiest employee in Chaos City definitely belonged to Mammis. She could sit at the same table as Mr. Mac and Little Boss every day, and eat the delicious food cooked by him for free. Just thinking about it made her happy. Wow, Mammis is hiring. Vanessa went up to the notice, and read it carefully. She was pleasantly surprised. I seem to fit all the requirements. Does that mean I can also work at Mammis? Young mistress, that's not very good. Laura said anxiously. If His Majesty heard that Miss was working at a restaurant as a waitress, she would be dead meat. No. If you dare to sign up, I'll send you home tomorrow. Abraham shook his head. His tone was firm. What a joke. Letting Vanessa work in Chaos City was already very stressful for him. If she really went to work as a waitress, he wouldn't be able to answer to the king. Vanessa pouted. She looked at the recruitment notice reluctantly, but could only choose to give up for now. Looking for a new waitress? Rena, who had rushed over to Mammy restaurant right after work with the intention of secretly learning how to make the hot pot, had her eyes lit up. She went over to take a look, and the more she read, the more surprised she became. She could almost match all the conditions on it. Although she was thin and weak, she often went jogging and hiking to exercise. Under the pressure of the demon, she worked overtime for a month, and still didn't collapse. A basic salary of 3,500 yuan a month. The restaurant provided food and lodging, as well as a single day off. This was much easier than her current finance job. Of course, the most important thing was her room and board. Mammy Restaurant was the #1 restaurant in Chaos City now. Although she really couldn't afford to spend hundreds of dollars on a meal because of her mother's illness, and she had never eaten at Mammy Restaurant before, she had already heard about all kinds of delicacies from many people. If she became a service staff member of Mammy Restaurant, she would be able to eat all kinds of delicious food for free. This job was simply too attractive. If she was just a waitress in a restaurant, she would definitely have no problem taking orders and serving plates for the customers every day. Fuck. Then, Rena's gaze landed on her chest, and she lowered her head to look at her bare chest. She couldn't help but sigh. What's wrong with being flat-chested? Did flat-chested eat your rice? Was flat-chested not even qualified to be a waitress? This was truly sorrowful and distressing. Miss, go back and eat more melons. It's not too late to grow, a succubus with a proud upper body said with a smile as she glanced at Raina. Raina looked at the succubus's breasts, which were about to pop out, and shut herself up. She was already 19 years old. Even if she wanted to grow, it would take more than a day or two to grow. Interview time. The day after tomorrow afternoon, after closing hours at Mammis. Rena remembered the time, and turned around to leave from the announcement. She had to think of a plan before the day after tomorrow. However, she didn't leave directly. She just stood a little further away. She came today to see how they ate hot pot. Even if she couldn't become an employee of Mammis, it was still very good to be able to eat hot pot in her own home. After everyone in the restaurant had dinner, Meg opened the door for business. The customer's reaction to the restaurant's recruitment was as enthusiastic as Meg had expected. He smiled and rejected a few rough men who strongly recommended themselves and started the busy evening business. After a day of fermenting the name of the hot pot, many customers came in groups to eat the hot pot. Basically, they sat at one table at a time. So many people are eating hot pot. Raina looked at the tables full of customers. There were even more customers who could only wait in line, but not many people showed any signs of impatience. After a while, the hot pot ordered by a customer was served. The bottom of the golden red pot of red soup, mixed with a rich spicy aroma, spiraled into the air and then spread out. To be able to turn the whole pot of soup red, how much chili did the boss put in it? But in addition to the spiciness, the aroma is also very rich. It's not covered by the spiciness at all. Instead, it feels like it's stimulated. Raina looked at the pot of red soup that had just been served at the table closest to her. She closed her eyes and seriously felt the aroma. She had a magical nose, or a strange ability to distinguish smells. She could separate the mixed smells and distinguish the various fragrances. The aroma of meat was the first to bear the brunt, and only big bones that had been simmered continuously for more than 10 hours could produce such a rich aroma. She could also distinguish 7 or 8 spices and seasonings from the aroma, but there were a few fragrances that she couldn't distinguish. It was not that she couldn't distinguish them, but she had never seen this kind of spices, so she couldn't name them. They should not be common spices in the market. The golden red thick oil floating on the red soup should be butter. Butter and lard had a somewhat different aroma and color. She often went to the market to buy some animal fat that the butchers didn't want at a low price, so she was not unfamiliar with butter. Spices are too expensive. Even if I want to make a simple version, I can't do it at all. Raina sighed. What she lacked most was money, but the price of some spices was no different from gold. It was not something she could afford. Your Mandarin duck hot pot, please enjoy. Just then, Elizabeth placed a double-flavored pot on the other table and lit the fire for them. This is bone-thick soup. Raina, who had originally planned to give up, had her eyes lit up. The soup pot that was split in the middle was half spicy red soup, while the other half was thick white soup. A few scallions and mushrooms floated in it, looking very refreshing. Chapter 1254. Omitting the aroma of the spicy soup pot and only taking in the aroma of the clear soup pot, the aroma of the bones was still strong, but it was particularly refreshing and neat. There were almost no extra spices added, only green onions and mushrooms to enhance the freshness. But even so, it was a pot of fragrant bone soup that people couldn't help but want to have a bowl of it. This is so simple, and if I go to the morning market early in the morning, I can buy super cheap pig bones, which are suitable for making soup. But if I only use meat soup to cook vegetables, won't the taste be too light? Raina's face showed a thoughtful expression. Then she saw the girl who ordered the clear soup pot get up and go to the seasoning area to make a dipping sauce. After cooking the vegetables in the boiling clear soup pot, she took them out and dipped them in the seasoning dipping sauce, and then put them into her mouth. Gulp. Raina's Adam's apple bobbed. She understood that although the clear soup had a much lighter taste, the dipping sauce could solve this problem perfectly. Furthermore, according to one's taste, one could also taste something that suited one's taste through the dipping sauce. This boss is really a genius. He can think of such a way to eat. I can try this clear soup hot pot tomorrow, Raina said to herself happily. Although she wanted to try the red soup hot pot with her taste, her mother could also eat the clear soup hot pot, and she could mix the taste she liked through the dipping sauce. Oh, this hot pot looks so fragrant, but the price is too expensive. I heard that it costs hundreds of copper coins to eat it once. Yes, the dishes cooked by the boss of this restaurant are delicious, but the price is too high. We can't afford it, so we can only smell the smell here. If it costs dozens of copper coins, we can take the children to have a meal here. But hundreds of copper coins, who can afford it with the old and young at home? When Raina was about to leave, she overheard the conversation of a few middle-aged men beside her. She felt a little upset. If she could have a meal with a few dozen copper coins, she would also want to bring her mother to such a beautiful restaurant. However, since so many people want to eat hot pot but can't afford it, and almost no one wants pork bones, duck intestines, and tripe in the market, Wouldn't it be a good business opportunity if there was a restaurant that could provide cheap hot pot? An idea suddenly popped up in Raina's mind. She looked at the many people who were watching other people's hot pot with great interest. These people were all potential customers. Moreover, she was confident that she could perfectly replicate the clear soup hot pot. Although the red soup hot pot was a little difficult, after removing a few spices, it shouldn't be a problem for her to make a red soup that tasted pretty good. With the average consumption of less than 100 yuan, this price was already lower than the price of Mami's single pot base. As an accountant, she quickly ascertained the huge profits and market in this. Raina's heart was set ablaze, but she quickly extinguished it with a bucket of cold water. This is Mr. Mac's invention. It's too much to copy it directly. It's like stealing. I'd better come back for the interview the day after tomorrow. Raina glanced at the people who were still watching with great interest, and turned to leave. She had to rush home to cook for her mother. At night, after the opening hours, everyone cleaned up the restaurant. Elizabeth and Yarbemia were also preparing to set off for the boundless sea realm. After receiving the people from Lantiste, you guys head north directly. We'll meet at the 9th peak north of Vic Mountain. Millimeter HM. Elizabeth nodded. Gina, you have to communicate well with the warriors of Lantiste, and remember to wear your uniform. Don't cause any trouble along the way, Meg said to Gina, who was hugging the crystal ball. As the translator, Gina also had to go to Lantiste with MIA and the rest. At the same time, she had to bring the uniform for the Lantiste warriors for this operation. Millimeter HM. Gina nodded obediently. Boss, if we're all leaving, how are you going to the north? MIA asked curiously. I've already contacted a flying steed. It will bring us north tomorrow. You don't have to worry about us, Meg said with a smile. Oh. MIA nodded. The three of them bade farewell to everyone, and then climbed onto Elizabeth, who had reverted to her original form. Soon, they became a small black dot in the sky. Barbara, you should go back and rest too, Meg said to Barbara, who was still standing at the door. I want to try to contact the Moon Nation again. Maybe they've already repaired the teleportation portal. In that case, you can get a powerful reinforcement from the Moon Nation, Barbara said as she walked into the restaurant. That might not be a good thing. Meg raised his eyebrows. The Norland continent was already in a mess. If the Moon Nation opened up a passageway between the Norland continent and the Norland continent, would it develop into a surface defense war with the Norland continent? That was something that no one could predict. Don't you want me to go home? Barbara turned to look at Meg. Big sister Barbara, Father said that you still need a few years to grow up. You don't have to worry, Amy reminded her. Who said that? I'm already grown up now. Barbara puffed out her chest. She didn't have much confidence. 15 years old. Underage. Meg pursed his lips. She was indeed still a little kid. Furthermore, Barbara was only 1.4 meters tall. She looked like a primary school student who went through puberty early. Sooner or later, you'll know how popular I am in the Moon Nation, Barbara thought to herself. Barbara was feeling a little embarrassed. She walked around Mammy Restaurant, and then stood in the center. She took off the necklace around her neck, and held it in her hand. After that, she closed her eyes, and began to chant an obscure incantation. Golden red light shone from the heart-shaped pendant on her necklace. With Barbara at the center, the image of an altar glowing with golden light slowly appeared beneath her feet, just like when Barbara had first appeared. It's here. Barbara opened her eyes, and looked at the altar with excitement. Right at this moment, the golden light flashed wildly a few times, and disappeared in an instant. The projection of the altar also disappeared without a trace. I failed again. Barbara hung her head with disappointment in her eyes. She had tried many times after coming to the restaurant, but she still couldn't establish a connection with the teleportation portal in the Moon Nation, let alone reactivate it. Was she never going to be able to return to the Moon Nation? It's all right, big sister Barbara. You still have us, two little hands said softly as they held onto Barbara's hands. Chapter 1255. In the royal palace of the Moon Nation, the king looked at his queen, who was tossing and turning restlessly in her bed, and comforted her. "Don't worry. Barbara is a smart child, and she's also an 8th-tier spatial magic caster. No one will be able to hurt her. Your Majesty, the child has never left the palace, and she doesn't know how sinister people are. She disappeared for a few months, and there's no news of her at all. She didn't contact us either. If anything happens to her, how am I going to live?" The queen sobbed, and her eyes turned red again. The king's expression was also a little heavy, but he still said gently, "Don't worry. The Grand Tutor and the rest are already speeding up the repair of the teleportation portal, and they recently found a sealed spatial stone vein. I've already ordered them to speed up the mining. Once the repair of the teleportation portal is completed, I'll personally lead the army to bring our child back. Quick report to His Majesty. There's a sudden anomaly in the teleportation portal. It might be Her Highness trying to contact us." A minister rushed into the palace in the middle of the night and shouted to the guards guarding the door. "Yes." The guard hurriedly replied. The disappearance of Princess Barbara had now become the most important matter in the Moon Nation. Urgent reports were sent out one by one, and the princess was still not found even after the entire Moon Nation was searched. A eunuch knocked on the door and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, the Grand Tutor reported that there's an anomaly in the teleportation portal. It might be Her Highness trying to contact us." "What?" The king and queen sat up from the bed almost at the same time. The king didn't even bother to change his clothes. He asked a palace maid to put on a cloak, and quickly walked out of the door. He said to the eunuch, "Ask the Grand Tutor to come and see me quickly." North of the goblins, a team of thousands of elves quietly arrived near the underground cavern and joined the elven army that was besieging the place. "Pass down the order. The army is to rest here and prepare for the general attack on the underground cavern tomorrow." In the tent, Helena ordered coldly to an adjutant. "Yes." The adjutant accepted the order and left quickly. Only Helena and Sally were left in the brightly lit tent. "High Priestess, when we attack the underground cavern tomorrow, what will happen if Princess Irina and the Night Elves don't surrender?" Sally hesitated for a while before asking Helena. "Since we're defending to the death, the only outcome is naturally death," Helena replied calmly. Sally clenched her fists subconsciously. "I know you pity them." Helena turned around and looked at Sally. "But if you want to be the new elven princess, or even the ruler of the Wind Forest, you have to learn to put away your pity. As a ruler, you need to be strong and ruthless. If you can't make your people fear you, then you can't make them listen to you. But they are still our compatriots." Sally frowned. "From the moment they chose to betray us, they were no longer our comrades, but the enemies of the Wind Forest." Helena chuckled disdainfully. "All those who try to shake our rule are our enemies, and death is the best way for our enemies to leave. If Her Majesty comes out of seclusion and knows about this, A cold expression appeared on Helena's face as she said, "Seeing as Her Majesty agreed to implement my policy back then to make the elven race a powerful race that no other race can look down on, then she won't say anything about our decision just because of her personal feelings. The interests of the elves are above everything else, and Her Majesty thinks so too." Gina pursed her lips, and she suddenly felt a little sad. Back then, Her Majesty the Queen had silently allowed Helena to do all kinds of things to the princess's child, which seemed to have verified Helena's words just now. But was this really the right choice? The so-called interests of the elves were the interests of a few big races. For the ordinary elves, they had lost their freedom and were burdened with layers of exploitation, but they had never really gained any benefits. "You're a smart child. I think you'll understand my painstaking efforts for the elves." Helena looked at the crystal ball floating in front of her. There was also a vast starry sky in it. Countless stars were shining, and one or two would turn into shooting stars from time to time. Among them, there was a dazzling star that was covered in a layer of darkness, and it was flickering unsteadily. Sally looked down and didn't say anything else. She clenched her fists, and her fingernails had already sunk deep into her flesh. She was powerless to change anything now. She could only continue to endure until the day she could lead the elves. Then, she would plan how to change everything. That was the agreement between him and Blower. They had chosen two different paths, but they would meet again here. When they met again tomorrow, they would be standing on completely different sides. Perhaps they would have to watch him and those respectable elves die. Two figures stood on the peak of the mountain, one in front and one behind. "Why aren't you leaving?" Irina turned around and looked at Shirley, who was standing behind her. Even though her exquisite face was full of fatigue after going through so many tough battles, she was still a rare beauty among the elves. Shirley looked at Irina with a smile, and said, "Even if I leave, it'll be very difficult for me to blend in with the ordinary elves. Why don't I follow your highness and fight in this final battle that's destined to be recorded in the history of the continent? It's quite good." This was the only elf in the Wind Forest that he admitted was more beautiful than him. Even though she still didn't know that he was the little boy who chased after them back then, it didn't seem so scary if he could follow her and fight for the freedom of the elves again, even if he had to die. "That's right. Beautiful people like us are helpless sometimes." Irina nodded her head as if she had experienced it deeply. A smile appeared on Shirley's face. The princess was still so interesting. It was a pity that her heart already belonged to that powerful man. But why is this the final battle? Irina looked down at the alliance below with a smile, and said, "This will be the first battle of our resistance for freedom. The goal is not to die heroically, but to let all our people see our courage and the hope of resistance. Let the fire of freedom spread throughout the Wind Forest. When the autumn wind blows, it will turn into a prairie fire and set the entire forest ablaze. Remember, this is the main point. It has to be tested." "I'll remember." Shirley's eyes lit up. She seemed to have found a career that she could devote her life to. Irina turned to look at Shirley, and solemnly said, "So, you can't die tomorrow. If I can't leave, you have to leave with Phyrus and return to Chaos City. RZ, you have to go to the north by yourself tomorrow. Do you remember this location?" On a mountain peak in the northwest of Chaos City, Meg was holding a map and teaching RZ the location. Chapter 1256. The next morning, Meg got up at the crack of dawn. He knocked on the door of the magic potion shop next door, gave the key to the restaurant to 1111, and asked her to take care of Amy and Anna for a day. "Don't worry, Mr. Mac. Although my cooking isn't as good as yours, I won't starve the two little ones," 1111 said with a smile. "Thank you." Meg thanked her and turned to leave. This battle was unpredictable. Meg didn't want Amy and Anna to take such risks. He also needed to be more focused on this war. Any mishap could cause them to fall into a state of eternal damnation. He's going out, leaving the two children at home. I wonder what he's going to do. 1111 looked at Meg's back and shook her head in confusion. She walked toward the restaurant. Her task today was to play with the two children. She had already told the boss yesterday. Speaking of which, the boss said that he was going out today, but he didn't say where he was going. These people were really mysterious. "Boss, I've trained this bald eagle for many years. You must ensure its safety and bring it back for me." Outside the city, an animal trainer handed a whip to Meg and said seriously, "Don't worry. We'll be back after visiting relatives in the south. If we're fast, we'll return the bald eagle to you tonight. Besides, the deposit I paid is enough for you to buy 2 more bald eagles. What are you worried about?" Meg, who had put on a big beard and darkened his skin by a few degrees, now looked like a 40-year-old uncle. Barbara, who was beside him, was wearing a gauze hat that covered her whole head. She looked like a child, and her face couldn't be seen. "Okay." The animal trainer nodded. What he said was right. This person gave the deposit very straightforwardly. Mag reached out to pat the bald eagle's head before jumping onto its back. Barbara also leaped onto the eagle's back. The bald eagle flapped its wings and flew up into the sky, quickly disappearing into the southern horizon. This bald eagle's wingspan was about 7 meters. It was just enough for 2 people to sit on its back, but it was a little crowded. Barbara, who was sitting in front, was almost hugged by Meg. "Aren't we going to the north? Why are we going south?" Barbara blushed, and tried to make her voice as cold as possible. We have to erase all traces of our participation in this war as much as possible, so we're going south for a few kilometers before turning around and going north around Chaos City, Meg explained. He tightened the reins and let the bald eagle continue to climb up. How troublesome. Barbara pursed her lips. She didn't think that was necessary. Yushi moved uncomfortably, but she realized that Mag had already wrapped his arms around her, and she couldn't move at all. She blushed even more when she felt Mag's warm breath right next to her ear. Meg didn't want to take advantage of the little girl, but this bald eagle was considered the animal trainer's personal mount. There was only one seat in the front and back, and he usually brought his wife and children out to play, so the design of the seat was very family-like. Sitting in the back, he could only stretch his hands forward and grab the reins hanging around the bald eagle's neck. This way, he could just wrap his arms around the front seat. After all, the bald eagle was only a first-tier magic beast. Its intelligence was basically zero. It couldn't be like a Z, who could just give it directions and it could find it on its own. If you didn't care about it, it could turn around and throw you from a few hundred meters high. Or if it saw a female bird halfway, it could cause you to deviate from the flight path to the Pacific Ocean. In addition to its lack of intelligence, the bald eagle's lack of wind protection was also a big feature. It was the 12th lunar month of the winter, the coldest time of the year. It was white everywhere. The snow that fell a while ago hadn't melted yet. Sitting on the eagle's back, flying at a speed of more than 100 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 500 meters and facing the cold wind head-on, was not a comfortable experience. Barbara, who was still a little restless, soon lost consciousness from the cold. Her hair was already covered with white frost. "I say, you let me sit in the front just to block the wind, right?" Barbara suddenly realized something. She turned around and looked at Meg bitterly. "I want to, but you have to be able to block it." Meg looked down at Barbara, who only reached his chin, and said helplessly. Barbara, who was despised for her height again, blushed and said seriously, I will grow again." Physiologically speaking, the growth rate of a girl's height will slow down or even stop after the age of 15, but the chest will continue to develop. Meg said calmly. He glanced at Barbara's chest that was completely out of proportion to her height. If it grew again, it would be a bit exaggerated. Bastard. Feeling Meg's gaze, Barbara blushed. If they weren't in the air, she would have jumped up and kicked him. Pop. Without waiting for Barbara to say anything, Meg put a helmet on Barbara's head. Then he pulled out a windproof thermal blanket from somewhere and wrapped it around Barbara's body. He wrapped his hands around her body, grabbed the reins, and began to turn the bird's head to the north. Barbara was stunned. The cold wind was instantly blocked, and a warm feeling surrounded her body. The helmet was surrounded by warm and comfortable fluff, but the front was transparent glass, so they could clearly see the outside. The soft and warm blanket blocked the cold wind and brought warmth. As for the back, the hard chest was as hot as fire, even hotter than the blanket. "Let's rest for a while. We may be facing a fierce battle today," Meg whispered in Barbara's ear as he put on his helmet. "Safety first." And far behind the bald eagle, a purple-striped griffin followed slowly in the sky. The morning sun shone on the mountain peak, illuminating the dark caves. In the abandoned mine, there were still traces of mining left behind. The continuous battles in the past half a month had also left new traces on the stone walls. At this time, teams of elven soldiers wearing the same armor had already assembled. They lined up neatly at the foot of the mountain, ready to launch the final attack into the underground cave. "Lord Borge, the guards have assembled. Should we launch the final attack?" a young general asked respectfully as he rode up to Borge, who was standing on the high platform. "Let the army wait." The high priest came from afar and brought the most elite warriors. "We can't take the credit for suppressing the bandits." Borge shook his head. He looked at the thousands of elves who had also assembled in the distance and sneered. "High priest, the army has assembled. Should we launch the attack?" an adjutant asked Helena respectfully. Helena glanced at Borge, and a trace of disgust flashed across her eyes. She retracted her gaze and looked at the underground cave with countless mines. She waved her hand and said, "Attack." Destroy the rebels. Kill all those who resist. Chapter 1257. Fireballs and huge icicles crashed into the dark caves. The water mags condensed the water elements between heaven and earth and turned them into torrents that poured into the caves, as if they wanted to fill up the caves. Countless magic spells bombarded the mountain peak, and the huge mountain peak began to shake. Rocks flew everywhere, as if it could collapse at any time. In an empty cave in the underground cavern, although rocks were falling from above at any time, the hundreds of elves present didn't show any signs of fear or retreat. Irina stood in the middle of the crowd and glanced at the old faces. These were all veterans who had guarded the wind forest in the past. She raised her voice and said, "Today's battle may be the last battle for the base in the underground cavern. It may also be the last battle for many of our comrades. But more of our comrades have already infiltrated the enemy. They will bear the mission of spreading the flames of revolution among the enemy and let the flames of freedom burn the wind forest. Your Highness, please leave. Let us veterans stand as the last sentries. You take the remaining young people and leave the cave. You are the hope of the wind forest's future and the backbone of the revolution. You must not fall here," an old man said sincerely. "Yes, Your Highness. Please leave and lead the young people to achieve the final victory of this war and establish the true elf kingdom." The other elves also tried to persuade her. The young people of the wind forest lack courage and courage. Today, I will teach them what resistance is, and what courage and freedom are. Irina shook her head and said seriously, "In this battle, I will stand with you all until the last moment." The eyes of the elves seemed to be burning with flames. Even though most of them were old men who were 700 or 800 years old, their chests were still surging with hot blood. It was as if they saw Her Highness the Queen who had led the elves to fight against the invaders. The flood that poured into the underground cavern was blocked by the blue light curtain, then turned into water vapor and rose up again. The icicles and fireballs sank into the mine. Most of the mine had already been sealed by stones, so they didn't cause any harm to the night elves who were concentrated in the underground cavern. The war has begun. It's time for us to enter the stage. Irina turned and walked toward the exit of the cave. She waved her hand gently, and the flood that poured into the underground cavern from all the passages instantly flowed backward. At the same time, she disappeared from the cave. Bang, bang, bang. The flood that poured into the underground cavern turned into pillars of water and flew out from all the caves in the underground cavern, turning into white ribbons and drenching the elves around the mountain peak. Irina appeared on the peak of the mountain peak and looked down at the elven army below. It's Princess Irina. Gazing at Irina, who was standing alone on the mountain peak, the elf who was casting the spell instinctively stopped her movements. In the past 10-odd years, Princess Irina had been seen as the pride of the wind forest and the next elven queen. However, there to fight elves to elves, elves to the elves, and the elves to essence, SSSS to the S to the elves. The S to the essence to the SS Earth as she was the princess, but she raised the flag of resistance for the elves at the bottom. Yet, they stood opposite her and helped her. This made them feel ashamed, but they were powerless to resist. The elves' high spirits that had just been stirred up were quickly dampened, and it quickly spread. Many elves even lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at Princess Irina. Sally looked up at the figure standing on top of the mountain peak. Her white dress was blown up by the mountain wind, and she looked like a goddess looking down like a queen. Even if she was forced into a desperate situation, she was still that proud princess. She was an existence that people could only look up to. Almost all the elites of the wind forest have been mobilized in order to encircle the night elves. Helena, Borge, how scared are you of us? Irina looked at Helena and Borge and said with a mocking smile, "Are the cries of freedom enough to make you feel scared?" Borge's face was ashen. He looked at those elven soldiers with their heads lowered, and he resisted the urge to lash out with his whip. Helena's expression was still cold. She looked at Irina and said, "Irina, if you lead the night elves to surrender now, I can spare their lives. But you will be locked up until Her Majesty comes out of seclusion. She will deal with you personally. Surrender." "This is not my style," nor is it the style of the night elves. Irina shook her head, and said with a smile, "This will be a long war. The elves at the bottom will unite and overthrow your rule, and build a new free kingdom. And today, we are going to kick off the prelude to this war. Night elves, fight for freedom." The figures of the night elves appeared at the cave entrance one by one. Their voices were deafening and resonated through the cloud. A faint light flashed in the eyes of the elven warriors. They looked at those elves who were shouting for freedom, and something seemed to stir in their hearts. Their hearts seemed to beat faster. The mid-level generals could not hide the fear on their faces. After besieging the underground cavern for a month, they had already felt the tenacity of those fellows. They were defending the underground cavern with 10 times the number of troops. If their troops were 10 times, or even 100 times more, they could not imagine what the wind forest would become. Helena's expression was a little gloomy. She had racked her brains for the elves to build this stable and strong system, and now these fellows were trying to overthrow it. They should all be tied to the stake and burned to death. The elves have never been as strong and stable as they are now. No other race will dare to invade the wind forest. And you traitors who are trying to overthrow the wind forest and create chaos and war will all be executed, and will forever be engraved on the pillar of shame of the elf. Helena raised the crystal ball in her hand. Starlight shone, and she shouted coldly, "Guards, exterminate these traitors." The 6,000 elven guards charged toward the underground cavern. The magic spells and arrows that had stopped previously were once again bombarded the mountain peak like raindrops. "God of light, please grant me the power to let the holy light shine upon the world." Irina closed her eyes, opened her hands, and chanted softly. The magic caster's staff floated in front of her, and then spun wildly. Beams of light intertwined and shone through the golden ball at the top of the magic caster's staff. The moment the chant ended, the golden ball suddenly erupted with a golden light that was even more dazzling than the sun, and spread in all directions. My eyes. The elves who were charging forward and surrounding the mountain peak covered their eyes almost at the same time as if they had gone blind. It was pitch black, and they could not see anything. Their formation was instantly messed up. "Helena, back then, you took advantage of me when I was at my weakest after giving birth to a child and snatched my newborn child. Let's settle this score today." Irina opened her eyes and held the magic caster's staff. She shouted coldly, took a step forward, and disappeared from the mountain peak. Chapter 1258. The holy light shone, and all the elves who were charging towards the mountain peak were blinded. At the same time, Irina took a step forward and disappeared from the mountain peak. A golden light flashed in front of Helena, and a magic caster's staff came crashing down on her head. From it, Helena snorted coldly, and a starry sky appeared above her head, blocking the magic caster's staff. Boom! With a dull thud, the magic caster's staff smashed into the starry sky. The cloud-like starry sky trembled, and the starlight flickered, but it was still firm. Irina appeared, holding the magic caster's staff with both hands, and still maintaining the smashing posture. Not many people knew that the prodigy of the wind forest, the only light element great magic caster in the world, was also a powerful close combat magic caster. Unfortunately, Helena was one of them, so she wasn't caught off guard by Irina, who suddenly switched to close combat mode. Her calm expression made it seem as if she had expected it. The stalemate continued, but the starry sky that was originally suspended above her like a shield suddenly surged in all directions like a tide, and swept Irina into the starry sky in the blink of an eye. Starry Sky Domain. Helena's most powerful domain, and also the domain that could give her the greatest boost. In a battle between 10th-tier great magic casters, whoever could drag the other into their own domain would basically be in an invincible position. Helena's Starry Sky Domain is indeed not that simple. Borge, who wasn't affected by the holy light earlier, looked at the area covered by the black starry sky. Even he couldn't see what was happening inside. However, that vast and deep starry sky domain and the powerful magic waves that couldn't be ignored made him a little wary. After Irina was destroyed, there would definitely be a battle between him and Helena. She was the one who allowed him to climb to his current position back then, but she didn't allow him to climb any higher. The great general of the wind forest was no longer enough to satisfy him. What he wanted was to become the king of the elves, and the ruler of the Norland continent. The power from the other world began to stir in his body again. The deal with the devil had just begun. Although he had encountered a little trouble before, they had now re-established the connection. It was just that this time, he had to pay a greater price. He had to sacrifice some of his people. He didn't have much time left. Not only did he have to deal with Irina, but he also had to deal with Helena as soon as possible. Only then would he be able to completely control the wind forest. A protruding black line that looked like an earthworm appeared between his eyebrows and disappeared in an instant. His red eyes also gradually returned to normal. The elves who had been blinded by the holy light began to recover gradually. What welcomed them was a torrent of magic spells and arrows that were extremely accurate. The defenseless elves were struck by this wave of attacks head-on, and several hundred of their elites fell in an instant. Their momentum was instantly thwarted, and many of the elves hurriedly retreated as their formation was thrown into disarray. On the other hand, the commanders of both sides were currently in the starry sky domain. No one knew what was happening inside. However, this was Helena's domain, after all. Furthermore, the High Priestess was known as the #1 person after the Queen. She had once led the elves to victory in the racial war with the Queen, and expelled all the invading demons from the wind forest. Now that she had trapped Irina in the starry sky domain, there was no doubt as to who would win. As long as Irina was defeated, the night elves would just be a pile of loose sand. They didn't even have a single 9th-tier magic caster. Their destruction would only be a matter of time. Your Highness. Sally, who was standing not far away from the starry sky domain, clenched her fists as she looked at the dark starry sky worriedly. A battle like this was no longer something she could participate in or influence. Being trapped in the other party's domain had already determined the outcome of this battle. Your Highness. Phyllis, who was standing at the entrance of a cave, exclaimed softly. She wanted to rush out instinctively, but Shirley grabbed her wrist. It's useless even if you go. You'll only be a burden to Her Highness. Shirley shook her head as she stared at the starry sky magic. Apart from being nervous, there was also a hint of anticipation. Her Highness was the most beautiful elf she had ever seen, and also the smartest one. She didn't believe that she would be so careless as to let herself fall into a hopeless situation. Just as the elves were waiting for Helena to capture Irina and announce the downfall of the Night Elves' rebellion, a blinding beam of golden light that was as sharp as a long sword forcefully split open a path in the dark starry sky. Irina, in her white robe, floated out of the gap that was split open. 100-meter-long beam of light shot out from the tip of her magic caster's staff like a sword, and swept across the group of elves. The armor and metal weapons on the elven soldiers melted instantly. In the blink of an eye, close to 1,000 elite elven soldiers were disarmed. The princess has broken the High Priestess' starry sky domain. The night elves were overjoyed, and their worried hearts were finally at ease. They didn't expect the princess to be so powerful that she wasn't even afraid of the starry sky domain. She actually broke it. Borge was also shocked. He could faintly feel that Irina had become stronger compared to the last time they fought. When his gaze landed on Irina's beam of light, his eyelids twitched, and he felt frustrated. Chapter 1259. I'll leave this battle to all of you. Remember, if you can make a move, don't talk. It's a one-wave attack. Beat them until they're scared, and leave after that. Safety first, confidentiality second. On the peak of a giant mountain, Meg looked at the 400 thugs in suits in front of him and shouted. The 400 Lantistean warriors wore the same black suits and the same black sunglasses. They stood there with cold expressions, and had the aura of a boss that made people respect them. Dump them. Everyone shouted in unison. Meg was very satisfied that the Lantistean warriors gave him face. He turned to the High Priest, and said, High Priest, our objective for this trip is to rescue the Night Elves and defeat the army from the Wind Forest. Our target is the middle and high-level combat power of the enemy. The battle will last for half an hour. If we can't expel them, we will escort the night elves south instead. Don't fight to the death with the wind forest. Don't worry, Mr. Meg. We will complete the mission. The high priest nodded. Meg nodded. He turned to look at Yarbemia and Elizabeth, and said, "Be careful. Boss, don't worry and wait for us here. We will bring Shirley and Phyllis back safely," Yarbemia said with a smile. Yarbemia and Elizabeth transformed back into their dragon forms, and let the 400 Lantistian warriors get on their backs. They flapped their wings and flew north. "You really don't want to go and take a look?" Camilla egged Meg on. "I know you want me to die accidentally, and the contract will be automatically cancelled. Don't worry, I cherish my life very much." Meg smiled and shook his head. "Coward." Camilla pursed her lips. She didn't expect this fellow to see through her thoughts. "Let's set off too. I can't wait to see what the war in this world is like." Barbara looked at Camilla eagerly. She didn't know how to ride the bald eagle, so she could only let Camilla carry her. "All right, let's go then." Camilla held Barbara's waist with one hand, and a pair of black wings appeared behind her back. She also flew towards the north. Watching the two giant dragons and the bat turn into black dots and disappear into the horizon, Meg turned around and whistled. The purple-striped griffin pierced through the clouds and swooped down from the sky. It spread its wings and slowly stopped on the mountain peak. Awoo! RZ raised its head and let out a long howl. Wagging its tail, it happily extended its head and rubbed against Meg's hand. "GG." The previously arrogant bald eagle was so scared that it fell to the ground, squeaking twice, lying on the ground, not daring to move. "Old friend, today is going to be a fierce battle, but we have to save her. Otherwise, we won't be men." Meg touched RZ's head, turned over, and jumped onto the griffin's back. He tore off his big cotton-padded jacket, revealing the black tights underneath. He put on a black cloak, a black and white mask, and the Tiendu sword at his waist. He was Alex. "Let's go. We have to get to the underground cavern before they do. The war may have already begun." Meg patted RZ's back gently. "Ow!" RZ flapped its wings and suddenly flew into the sky. It plunged into the clouds, turned into a black shadow, and disappeared into the horizon in the blink of an eye. The battle between Helena and Irina was dark and extremely dangerous. Scorching hot meteorites fell all over the ground, leaving many craters of various sizes on the ground. There were a few holes in Irina's dress, and a few strands of Helena's hair had been chopped off, making her look rather disheveled. The crystal ball emitted a dim light, and stars were annihilated from time to time. The magic caster's staff was already stained with blood, but it still made Irina look holy and pure. On the other side, the elven guards who had resumed their attack were also engaged in an intense battle with the night elves. The night elves, who were far outnumbered and weaker individually, displayed an awe-inspiring tenacity. When their magic was exhausted and the last arrow in their quiver was shot, they began to lift stones and throw them at the elves at the foot of the mountain. The guards, who were far more powerful, armed, and outnumbered than the night elves, were still unable to take down the underground cavern after 3 or 4 consecutive charges. The elven guards looked at the elderly elves who were pierced by arrows and covered in blood, but were still throwing stones down without a care for their own safety. They felt some respect and fear in their hearts. What kind of power was supporting them and making them so fearless of death? Was it freedom? Compared to freedom, was death really not worth mentioning? These questions began to torture the hearts of these young people, causing their momentum to slow down a lot. Their willingness to be exploited in order to survive also began to waver. "I once joined forces with the Queen to lead the elves to chase the invaders out of the forest and spent my life to build a powerful elf tribe. You should learn to respect and cherish it instead of trying to destroy it." Helena held up the crystal ball slowly and looked at the pale-faced Irina whose chest was rising and falling slightly. She pointed at a star that was shining brightly and dimly, and said, "This is you. You used to be the brightest star in this starry sky, but now you're about to be annihilated. Irina, you disappoint me too much. This forest is the one that disappoints me. I used to think this was the most perfect place, but later I realized that this is actually the dirtiest place, even dirtier than the Demon Islands. Helena shook her head, and the elven guards who had already reached the top of the mountain dimmed slightly. This was a battle that was destined to be a crushing defeat. Everyone already knew that before it even started. Meanwhile, those old fellows had already displayed their awe-inspiring bravery and the strongest oath to freedom. The battle with Helena had consumed most of her magic power. With the support of the Starry Sky domain, Helena's strength had indeed exceeded her expectations. Number 1 below the Queen, this was not just a compliment. The Night Elves did not have any reinforcements. Fortunately, those young comrades had all retreated. They should have disguised themselves and infiltrated various families and territories to spread the seeds of freedom among the lower class. If there was a day when the wind blew, the seeds of fire would become a forest fire. Unfortunately, she might not have the chance to see it. I should have done more the last time. It's a pity that I only kissed her. Irina thought of Meg and Amy, but she did not want them to appear here at this moment. If she left, Amy could only be taken care of by Meg. Her food is so delicious, and Amy is so clingy to her. Even without me, there seems to be no problem. Irina thought to herself, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then, there was no problem. She raised the magic staff in her hand and looked at Helena with a hint of madness. You won't have the chance to self-destruct. Helena seemed to have seen through Irina's thoughts. She clenched her fist, and the starry sky in the magic ball collapsed instantly. The Starry Sky domain, which covered an area of thousands of square meters, also contracted instantly and squeezed towards Irina, who was standing in the center. Starry Sky collapse, Helena's ultimate magic. Howl. Right at this moment, a long howl came from the sky. A purple figure descended from the sky like lightning and went straight for the collapsed Starry Sky. Chapter 1260. The realm of stars instantly collapsed toward the center as if it were being squeezed. The black starry sky became a frantically surging ink-black mist. Once it completely collapsed, everything in the center would disappear. Your Highness, the Dark Elves exclaimed. However, they were powerless at the sight of the collapsing realm of stars, so they could only look on helplessly. Right at this moment, a figure descended from the sky and flashed toward the collapsing realm of stars like a bolt of purple lightning. A long sword was unsheathed, and a streak of silver sword intent that was more than 10 meters long tore through space and sliced into the frantically shrinking realm of stars. Boom! The shrinking realm of stars was sliced open by the sword, and the process of collapsing was interrupted. Meanwhile, the purple-striped griffin still plunged into the chaotic mist like a bolt of lightning, and in the next instant, it flew out from the other end. A man wearing a black and white mask sat on the griffin's back with Irina in his arms and a silver sword in his hand. He was extremely arrogant. The battlefield suddenly fell silent. All of the elves looked at the purple-striped griffin, and they suddenly thought of some legends. A hint of reverence appeared in their eyes as they looked at the masked man holding Irina. Alex, a man whose name shook the entire continent. He was known as a dragon-slaying warrior. Several months ago, he had appeared in the Wind Forest and severely wounded Borge. Many of the elves still remembered that scene clearly. They had thought that this battle was already over, but they didn't expect him to appear. This made the situation a little uncertain. Your Highness. Phyllis, who was about to jump off the mountain, looked at Irina in his arms with reddened eyes. She finally heaved a sigh of relief. Alex finally came at the last moment. The princess's love for him was not in vain. Alex. Shirley also let go of Phyllis's hand. She looked at the back of the man sitting on the griffin and Irina in his arms, and a smile appeared on her face. As expected, he was the only one in this world who was worthy of the princess. Sally looked at Irina in the mysterious man's arms, and then her gaze fell on the masked man. Was he the man in the legends? A hero saving a damsel in distress. This scene was indeed very impactful, and it made her heart explode. But why does this figure look so familiar? Where have I seen him before? Sally's eyes narrowed slightly, revealing a trace of doubt. She had heard of Alex's name countless times, and had also imagined what the man who captured the princess's heart would look like, but she was sure that she had never seen him before. But why did he feel so familiar? However, if he could take the princess away, he would at least have a chance to survive today's battle. The realm of stars was forcibly destroyed, and Helena took a step back. She looked at the purple-striped griffin with a cold expression, but there wasn't much surprise in her eyes. "Alex, you really came." A sinister smile appeared on Borge's face. He waved his hand, and several figures behind him flew off in different directions. "Why are you here?" Irina looked at Meg with a look of surprise on her face. That sword attack from before was definitely his peak. Could it be that he had recovered his strength? "Only 15 minutes, Meg said softly with a hint of helplessness. "You're really short." Irina pursed her lips, but there was a sweet smile at the corner of her mouth. She thought that she would never see him again, but he still came. "Seems like it's very necessary to correct my manhood." Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. This was a matter of a man's dignity. Besides, 15 minutes wasn't considered short, okay? "I'll take you guys away." Meg looked at Irina. Her face was a little pale, and there was some dust on her face. She looked a little disheveled, and it made his heart ache a little. "Us?" Irina looked in the direction of the mountain peak. The night elves had already retreated to the mountain peak. After a tough battle, there were less than 100 of them left, and almost all of them were injured. After stopping to rest, the elves began their final round of attack. "You can't take so many people away." Irina shook her head slightly. RZ was indeed very big, but Helena and the others wouldn't just watch them take everyone away peacefully. "Trust me," Meg said gently. The purple-striped griffin turned around and flew towards the mountain peak. With a flap of its wings, the elves that were climbing the mountain peak were blown away like ants. Ding! Detected that an unstable factor poses a huge threat to the progress of the God of Cookery cultivation plan. New mission: host, please kill the target, Borge, within 24 hours. Mission reward: activate the round-the-world mission line and obtain a portable restaurant. Mission failure: physical strength -3. Just then, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. "Fuck." Meg raised his eyebrows. This was completely outside of his plan. His plan was to retreat without any injuries. The role of the 400 thugs in suits was to deter them, but the system suddenly gave him a mission to kill Borge. Although he detested Borge to the core, he was still a powerful 10th-tier powerhouse. Although the system gave him 24 hours, it was no different from 15 minutes to him. 2 minutes had already passed. The griffin flew around the mountain peak and blew away all of the attacking elves. Meg whispered into Irina's ear, "I want to kill Borge." "They probably want to kill you too." Irina's brows furrowed slightly as she looked at the calm Helena and Borge, who was galloping toward the mountain peak. "If you want to kill someone, you have to be prepared to be killed." Meg gently placed Irina down on the mountain peak. He then steered the purple-striped griffin toward Borge with a serious and focused expression. "Do it," Helena shouted coldly. She raised the crystal ball above her head. Night fell again, and it was like a black curtain that slowly pulled toward Meg. At the same time, 4 elderly elves appeared behind Helena. They were all holding magic casters' staffs and chanting spells silently. Light flashed on their staffs, and terrifying magic waves gathered. There were also 4 elven magic casters following behind Borge. They were chanting spells, and flames appeared in the sky. Trees began to grow from the ground, and the branches extended toward the sky like vines. 10 10th-tier great magic casters. This encirclement against the night elves finally revealed its true fangs at this moment. The night elves and Irina were only one of the targets. Alex was the main character of this encirclement. On the mountain peak, Irina stabbed her magic caster's staff into the mountain rock and chanted softly. Bright sunlight pierced through the black curtain and landed on the golden crystal at the top of the magic caster's staff. Then, it turned into a beam of light and chased after the purple-striped griffin. What a big battle. It would be awkward if the boat fails. Meg held the Tian-Du sword with both hands, and his expression also became very serious. The 10th tier great magic casters of the elves were almost all out. This was indeed a little beyond his expectations. Chapter 1261. It was too late to retreat now. Meg had to at least hold on until the reinforcements arrived. Of course, if the reinforcements did not arrive in 12 minutes, he would have to fight with his life. The purple-striped griffin opened its mouth and shot out a ball of purple lightning. The flames in the sky were instantly blasted open, and a hole was created. It flew up and avoided the twigs that were coming from below. It increased its speed and avoided the spells that were coming from all directions. Then, it turned around and dove down. The Tian-Du sword glowed coldly as it rushed towards Borge. Darkness descended, and the starry sky domain enveloped Meg. The air seemed to have become muddy. Just then, a beam of holy light shone from the peak of the mountain and tore the darkness apart. It followed the purple-striped griffin like a protective talisman and opened a path for it. Go to hell, Alex. Borge's face was covered in a black death aura. He raised his black magic staff above his head, and a huge black tiger suddenly jumped out. It opened its black bone wings and pounced towards the purple-striped griffin. This aura. Mag's brows furrowed tightly as he looked at the massive tiger with a pair of flamboyant skeletal wings and a black aura revolving around its body. The rich aura of death emanating from its body clearly wasn't something that an elf who was close to nature should possess. This Borge could make the system issue a mission to kill him in the name of affecting the process of becoming the god of cookery. It seemed that he had obtained some unusual power. Borge, who was severely injured by him last time, was also very chaotic now. It was strong sometimes and weak sometimes. The changes were very sudden. This situation was also very strange, but one thing was for sure. He had become stronger than before. Magic transformation was a common method used by high-level magic casters. The black tiger's size was not inferior to the purple-striped griffin at all. It jumped up and pounced on the purple-striped griffin like a hungry tiger pouncing on a sheep. Its sharp claws with a black glow tried to tear Arzee's wings while its bloody mouth bit towards its neck. Borge sneered, as if he could already see the scene of the purple-striped griffin and Alex being torn apart. Last time, he was severely injured by a griffin, and his reputation was ruined. The Grim Reaper healed his injuries and gave him even more power. Killing Alex and Irina would remove the biggest threat. This tiger of death came from the netherworld. It could tear apart all enemies and absorb their blood essence and strength for its own use. Today, he was going to return the humiliation he had suffered. After obtaining the power of Alex and Irina, he would become the most powerful person in the Wind Forest, and embark on his journey to conquer the Norland continent. Such a rich aura of death. What is Borge trying to do? Helena looked at the black tiger with unease and disgust in her eyes. The other elves were also shocked and fearful upon seeing this. Meg held the sword in front of him with both hands. Holy light fell on the sword, covering the silver-heavy sword with a layer of golden light. The elemental energy in his body circulated crazily and poured into his hands. The 10-meter-long sword chi rose and was dyed with golden holy light. It's useless. Go to hell. Borge roared with a sinister smile. The skeleton-winged tiger let loose an enraged roar as its eyes turned crimson. Its black skeletal wings were like a pair of sharp blades as it slashed toward Meg said in his heart, and slashed forward with his sword. The furious bone-winged tiger was still huge in front of the 10-meter-long sword chi. Its sharp bone wings gave off a terrifying glow, and the aura of death surrounded them. It was not afraid of Meg's sword chi at all. It did not dodge, and continued to attack Meg and the purple-striped griffin at the same time. Slash! The sword chi slashed the bone-winged tiger's body. The holy light enveloping the sword chi clashed with the aura of death, and the black aura of death instantly retreated like fire meeting water. This sword chi was very powerful and very fast. With the support of the holy light, that rich black aura of death retreated in a panic, and did not cause any obstruction to the sword chi. The sword chi landed on the bone-winged tiger's body. Roar. The bone-winged tiger let out a terrified roar, and tried to use its claws to stop the sword chi. But its speed was too slow in front of that sword chi. The purple-striped griffin suddenly charged forward and cleaved the tiger's head with its long sword, splitting it in half like a hot knife through butter. The 100-meter-long bone-winged tiger was instantly reduced to a rain of blood, which splattered onto the ground, corroding a series of ghastly craters into the rocks. Pfff. Borge threw up a mouthful of black blood, and he clutched his chest as he stared at Meg with incredulity. Impossible. All of the elves were stunned speechless upon seeing this. They were amazed by Alex's immense power, but they were also horrified by Borge's terrifying aura and uncomfortable dark magic. Even the great magic casters reflexively stopped casting their spells. This aura doesn't belong to this world, does it? Meg raised his sword chi toward Borge, and said in a cold voice, "Then you deserve to die." No. Borge retreated in horror, and he raised his magic caster's staff in an attempt to cast another spell. Cold light flashed, and the sword chi had already sliced through the staff, as well as Borge's horrified face. Lord Borge is dead. Borge's elven guards were all shocked when they saw half of Borge's head being chopped off with a single slash. Lord Borge, who was unparalleled in the eyes of all the elves, was actually killed in an instant by 10 great magic casters. That man was too terrifying. It's good that he's dead. Helena's eyes flashed, but the corners of her mouth curled up quickly. This was also an uncontrollable chess piece. The Wind Forest only had the queen, and Borge wanted too many things. Then, she stared at Meg, and the stars in the crystal ball shifted. The starry sky domain surged again, and surged toward Meg. "Kill him," she said coldly. Yes. The great magic casters behind her had yet to recover from the shock of Borge's death, and they hurriedly continued to chant their spells. On the mountain peak, the holy light disappeared instantly, and the pale-faced Irina staggered to hold onto her magic caster's staff. She looked at Meg's back, and a smug smile appeared on her face. "My man indeed. Ding. The target is confirmed dead. Congratulations on completing the mission. You've received the reward, a portable restaurant, and you've unlocked the mission line. Mission 1. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. However, Meg wasn't in the mood to listen to the system's blabbering. After confirming Borge's death, he immediately steered the purple-striped griffin into the sky. 3 meteors burning with red flames crashed at the position he was standing at previously. Debris flew everywhere, and 3 huge craters were left behind. Countless firebirds appeared in the sky, and the crazily growing giant trees started to shoot poisonous thorns. Countless meteors fell from the dark sky. The purple-striped griffin's speed started to decrease rapidly in the starry sky domain, and it could only barely dodge the chain of magic attacks. Without the guidance of the holy light, it couldn't even determine the direction. At the same time, the elven guards who had stopped to rest earlier also launched their final charge toward the mountain peak. After killing Borge, the situation fell into a quagmire. "System, if you don't do something, Daddy is going to die," Meg shouted in his heart. No matter how strong he wasn't a god. He was facing 9 10th-tier magic casters, and he was trapped in their domains. He had nowhere to retreat, and he couldn't even touch his opponents. Bullying with numbers, how shameless. Chimpage, I agree. At this moment, 2 old voices suddenly sounded from the sky. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.